They called me Mac because no one wanted to say my last name over the radio. Too many syllables. Too easy to chew when you were already chewing mud. I was 20 and a few months, the youngest in the squad by a hair. March of 1968, north of the DMZ. Night that felt borrowed from somewhere colder. We moved single file on a jungle trail that didn't want to be a trail. Bamboo bowed across like ribs. Vines tried to lace our elbows to the trunks. My radio hummed against my spine, warm as a small animal and twice as moody. Every step I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 1, 2. Don't trip the wire that might be there. Don't put your heel where Reyes just put his. Reyes walked point. Shoulders like a coat rack, hat brim dark and slick. He had the kind of patience that made other guys impatient. He could stand still long enough for the night to forget he was there. Behind him, Harlan, our squad leader, moved like a man who had already seen the future and didn't care for it. He kept a finger on his compass, like it was a trigger. The air smelled like leaves crushed under a wet boot. Somewhere off to our left, a river talked in a voice too quiet to carry. Bugs did the heavy lifting trills, whines, 100 little engines working the dark. I had the handset looped so it wouldn't smack against my chest. I had my thumb on the volume. I had that feeling in my neck, like somebody had pressed a heat coin into it. We climbed only a little, just enough for my calves to say so. The clouds were thin enough to smear a moon somewhere above us, a pale nickel behind gauze. Harlan raised his fist, the column folded in on itself. Boots planting in the exact holes the last boots made. I could hear the soft chorus of guys putting safeties where safeties belong. No talking. We barely breathed out loud. Then Harlan flattened his hand and cut it across his throat. Reyes took a knee. I slid down behind a log slick with moss and something else. My radio gave a little sigh. The kind it gave when the batteries settled. And every insect in that patch of forest went kitosia once. It was not a tapering off. It was a switch. I used to think the quiet would be the best part. I was wrong. The quiet has a shape. It makes you the loudest thing inside it. I could feel my pulse wanting to leave my body. I pressed my jaw shut so my teeth wouldn't click. Reyes angled his chin to the right. I followed it with my eyes. Across the trail, through a curtain of thin bamboo. Something moved. Not moving the way we moved. Not the way a person shoulders through vines, letting them complain against fabric. This was gliding, slow and deliberate, as if the night were a hallway and someone had all the lights to themselves. I didn't reach for my handset. Harlan would have broken my fingers if I had. We watched. The first one came into the space where the trail cut through the growth. Tall. Taller than any man I had stood next to. The kind of tall that makes other tall things seem like they are trying too hard. Arms long. Head set forward a little, like a swimmer anticipating the cold. It paused, just enough for the bamboo to breathe around it. I told myself it was a trick of angles, of shadow. I told myself anything I could bring from the shelf of reasonable explanations. I ran out of items fast. Its skin caught light. Not light like a flashlight. Not the flat wash you get off a flare. It was like scales had borrowed the moon and decided to give some back. Each plate offering a small wrong mirror. The bands of bamboo threw 1,000 slivers onto it, and the slivers slid across without sticking. It moved on. Another followed. Taller by a little. Same forward tilt. Same long arms. Something about the feet wide. Shirt. The bamboo hit against their legs and made no sound, like even the plants had gotten the message about the whole quit thing. If you've ever watched a parade from behind a fence, you know how your brain times the gaps. You expect a drum after the trumpet, a horse after the drum. I waited for the gap to break. It did not. A third went by. A fourth. No hurry. No interest in us. We were furniture. We were trees. We were not anything they came to find. Reyes touched 2 fingers to the air and pointed. He had picked up a smell. I got it a second later, something sour and rotten, like eggs broken in a heat-wave kitchen and left to plead their case. It slid into the back of my mouth and sat there. I looked where he pointed. In a damp patch of earth just off the trail, the moon had managed to paint a shallow print. Wide, white, not a boot, not a bare human foot. 3 toes, if toes were the word. Each ended in something that narrowed like a claw. The edges were clean, like weight had been placed and lifted without any wobble. Harlan didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand said, wait. His hand said, breathe. His hand said, if you move, don't. I tried to count to 10. I lost track at C6 when the radio crackled. Not a voice, a small throat clear, a wire brushing a sleeve somewhere. I wanted very much to take my thumb off the volume and make it quieter than quiet. I let it be. The quiet pressed in again and sat on my shoulders. The 4 shapes were gone to our right, into thicker growth, the kind that eats you with both hands and then asks what you brought for dessert. The trail ahead looked ordinary, in the way a staged room looks ordinary, too perfect. A leaf with a bead of water on it. An ant hauling something twice its size across a stem. The ant kept going. I took that as a good sign, and then felt stupid about it. I saw Reyes swallow. His Adam's apple jumped like it was trying to get out. His left hand made a small turn in the air, asking Harlan if we were going to keep moving. Harlan's fist did nothing for a long half-minute. Then it opened, slow as a sunrise, and tipped forward. We went. It was 1 step at a time, then another. My boot slid once and caught. A branch kissed the side of my face and left a wet stripe. I watched my own hands as if they belonged to somebody more trustworthy. The smell stayed with us a little less than a minute, then thinned until it was memory. Bugs warmed back up. First one voice, then a messy choir. A frog said its piece from a puddle that wasn't on the map. The river to the left climbed 1 notch louder, like a man clearing his throat to say something he would not say. We made the ridge above the bend and hunkered down in a crease that would have been called a foxhole if it had any manners. Reyes scanned with his scope, long, slow arcs. Harlan did not look at me, which meant he was worried about me. I pretended not to notice and pulled the handshake close enough to kiss. When I cupped the eye cups of my night optic to Maurice, the whole world went to a smear. First-gen gear, blooming around anything that had the nerve to be bright. Stars turned to fuzzy dimes. Leaves became green fog. I breathed through my nose and let the focus drift past perfect. Down by the river, where the bank gave up and became sand, something shifted. A shadow moving in a place where the optics said there should be nothing to move. The wind was coming from behind us, cool off the high ground. Leaves were stroking the air the wrong way. And still, down there, the light had found something to catch. I eased the optic away and let my naked eyes try. The night snapped back into place. Reyes leaned close enough to fog my ear and whispered without sound. There. He tapped a spot with a finger he never lifted more than an inch. I followed it and saw the sandbar again. There was a figure on it. Tall, arms long, head a little forward. The skin threw back a soft shiver of light, like mica under a trickle. It did not look at us. It did not look at anything I knew to name. It walked past, like a man who had missed his turn and refused to admit it. The bugs shut up again. Not all at once this time. In patches, the way a crowd goes quiet when a rumor hits the back row first. The river forgot what it wanted to say. I felt my mouth open, then close. I felt the weight of the radio. The way it would sound if I asked the boat unit on the bend to say if they saw what we saw. I pictured Harlan's face if I said it out loud. I pictured Captain Nobody at the forward base asking why I had not put any of this in a proper report. Reyes touched the print in the mud with the tip of his knife. Not hard, just to prove it had depth. He lifted the blade and a thread of water clung to it and broke in a perfect line. The figure on the sandbar kept going, slow, certain. It left no track I could see from where I lay. It reached the far edge of the sand, where the jungle grew up like a curtain, and the curtain swallowed it. I waited for someone to say anything. Harlan let the silence measure itself. My heartbeat stopped trying to walk out of me, and settled for pounding on the door. I didn't know what we had seen. I didn't know what to call it, so that the world would keep being the same shape when I was done. I only knew one thing with the sort of certainty you can keep in your pocket and hold with your thumb when the lights go out. The light wasn't moonlight. Reyes had point again, because nobody was better at it. He didn't ask. He just went where the space thinned first and let us move into it. The trail wriggled along a spine of ground and then fell back into bamboo and thorn. Night had a few minutes left. That gray-ware color is a rumor. We were slower now. The way you are after you learn a fact your body doesn't want. My radio rode a little higher on my shoulder, so I could hear the squelch before it tried to shout. Harlan spaced us tighter, palms out. Breathe. Use your eyes more than your legs. The smell found us before anything else did. It came like a coin someone pushed under a door. Rotten. Sulfur and meat gone bad. It touched the roof of the mouth first, and then the eyes. A sting without smoke. Reyes stopped. He didn't look back. He let his left hand drift down where we could see it, and opened his fingers. 5, then 3, then 1. It was his way of saying not gas, not ours, not recent. He'd been around enough boom to sort one stink from another. We fanned a little without breaking the line. Harlan gave me 2 fingers' eyes, then pointed off the trail. I slid where he pointed, keeping the barrel low, the sling tight. The ground went from leaf mat to a patch that held water in shallow cups. Something had moved here heavy enough to leave a memory. The print was the kind of white that makes your brain reach for bears, for someone's joke shoe, for anything with a known name. 3 forward pads, not toes exactly. Each ended in a fine point, not blunt. The back edge had a swell like a heel. The depth was wrong. Too clean. Whatever made it put weight down and picked it up steady, like it did not test where it would land. It just knew. Reyes crouched over another one. Same shape, same confidence. The spacing between them said legs long enough to make ground without trying. No drag of cloth, no edge of tread, no pebbles kicked aside. The water in the bottom of one print still trembled as if the ground remembered. Lon hung back, respectful of his own rules. He whispered a word that wasn't mine to hold right. He tried again in English. "Night men," he said, and shook his head, unhappy with how thin that sounded. Not spirits, not soldiers, not the kind of thing you shout at. The kind of thing you don't block. I wanted to ask if anyone had ever followed the prints. I didn't, because the answer sits between the question and the mouth. If they had, you wouldn't be here to tell me. We let the smell tell us the way. It was stronger off to the right, away from the river's quieter mood. The bamboo loosened, then bunched. Leaves wrote noise on our sleeves. A vine tried to take my wrist. I unhooked it with a breath and a curse I kept inside my teeth. The quiet didn't slam shut this time. It thinned. Frogs paused. Insects skipped beats. The space between sounds stretched a little too high. Harlan stopped us with one hand and pointed with the other. Up the slope, a line of limestone showed through the green like a bone under skin. Vines draped it. The rock had an opening where the shadow collected and didn't let go. The entrance wasn't big. Not the stadium mouth the old woodcutter would find years later. This was a door someone patient had made. Its edges were too even. Not a perfect square. Not a machine job. Just wrong enough you could feel the intention. The air that breathed out of it was wrong too. Cool when the morning wanted to be warm. Damp in a way the jungle already was, but different. A smell like eggs and metal and old water, all stacked. Reyes set his palm just above the ground and held it there. He was feeling the air move. In, out, breathing. He tapped his wrist twice. Harlan shook his head. Not yet. We pulled back half a dozen yards to let the rock be rock again, and to put our hearts back where they belonged. I tried the optic, then didn't. There was nothing a smear would give me that my eyes and the hair on my forearms were not already delivering. That was when we heard it. A metallic tapping. Light, deliberate, not close, not far enough to be a hammer in another province. It had a rhythm, but not a song. Tap. Then a space, tap. Another space, longer. Tap, tap. My head found patterns it wanted to call code. It wasn't code, I knew. Reyes raised one finger. Listen. He traced a quick line in the air down the slope and out toward the river. The tapping wasn't from the hole. It was from somewhere lower, somewhere between us and water. It was as if the ground had picked up a sound made for another place and lent it to us. The smell freshened with the next breath of cave air. The chorus of bugs answered by taking another step back. Harlan knelt, slow, and put a hand on the soil. He didn't look for prints now. He was reading tremor. He was seeing if the ground itself had something to say. He stayed there long enough for my knees to start a religion. Then he stood and signed for us to hold. Lon leaned in, small voice, the kind you use around a baby or a mind. Do not block it, he said, gesturing at the entrance. Place for breath, for going and coming. Harlan nodded like a man who agreed with the thing, but not the timing. He didn't lay charges. He didn't send Reyes into the dark. He did what good leaders do, when belief and orders share the same cramped space. He moved the problem a few inches down the trail. We circled left, keeping the door in the corner of the eye, and came out above a sliver of beach the river had laid down for its own reasons. The sand wore the morning like fresh powder. No tracks, no hoof, no boot. The light found a way through clouds and set the thin water on the flats to shining. The tapping kept on. I could feel it under the ribs more than hear it now. Tap. Wait, tap, tap. The boat out on the bend whispered over the radio. A voice I didn't know asking if anyone had eyes on a sandbar past the dead banyan. I let it ride. Reyes made a circle with thumb and forefinger, the way he did when he wanted us to mark a thing, without announcing it. At the edge of the sand where the jungle came down to drink, the leaves held a wet gloss, as if something tall and certain had brushed through a minute ago. No break, no tear. Just water shined up in a perfect even line at shoulder height. If your shoulders started where ours didn't. He stepped forward 2 paces and stopped. His hand drifted again. He was pointing now at nothing I could see. He didn't move for a long time. Then he started to ease backward. Slow, slow, slow. When he reached us, he didn't speak. He wet his lips and wrote it with 2 fingers on his thigh. Eyes. Then he wrote it again above the knee. Forward. Not on the sides like a deer. Front. Predator math. Our old brain took the note and lit the board. We held there with our bodies trying to decide whether to freeze or run. The tapping quit as if someone had closed a palm over it. The breeze off the cave cooled the sweat at the base of my skull. The jungle found its voices again in the places where fear had not yet rented rooms. Back, Harlan mouthed. He drew us away, The way you draw a needle out of skin. Clean. No snag. We left the entrance as we found it. Breathing. We left the sand as a rumor arranged by the river. We left the prints in the wet places and the smell standing in the air like a wrong note. At the last turn before the ridge, Reyes paused. He looked at the trail as if it might speak if he was polite enough. He crouched, and with the flat of his blade, he pointed to a shallow scrape in the dirt I would have missed if he hadn't shown me. Not a print. A place where something had put a hand 3 fingers, spread, and then lifted it again without hurry. The tips had left crescents the size of quarters. The center had no lines a human palm would have. Just smooth. He didn't touch it this time. He let it be. He stood and rolled his shoulders like someone taking a coat back from a chair and not liking the weight anymore. We climbed for the ridge that looked down on the bend. The light grew a shade realer. You could start to tell one green from the next. The radio woke long enough to cough a mayday into my ear-river unit. 1 click below. Engine coughing water. Something pacing them along the bank. My thumb found the volume without thinking. I looked at Harlan. He looked at Reyes. We all knew where we were going next. Behind us, the cave breathed out one more cool draft. The jungle breathed in. The tapping did not come back. I checked my watch and found it useless in the way watches are, when time is doing its own thing. I checked my magazines. I checked the squelch. I checked my own hands. 10 fingers, steady enough. Reyes took the last few yards to the crest on his elbows. He peered over at the river and let a long seconds count settle in his chest. He exhaled slow, like a man trying not to fog the glass on a display he can't afford to break. "Contact," he whispered, only loud enough for my bones to hear it. Down on the sandbar stood a figure, taller than a man, arms long, head angled forward, skin taking the morning and giving it back wrong. It did not look at us. It looked across the water, as if waiting for the boat we could not yet see. Reyes touched the brim of his hat and pushed it an inch back so he could see more of what he did not want. He tilted his head, listening. That was when the metallic tapping started again, farther along the bank, answering itself. And from the river, the boat's engine coughed once, then deet. Harlan owned the ridge the way a carpenter owns a level. He flattened us into the ground, 2-man hasty positions, interlocks sketched with his fingers. Reyes on the left arc, me on the handset, Lon tucked where he could look and not be looked at. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The air around him said it. Hold, see, breathe. Pre-dawn is when the world forgets what to do with itself. The sky was a thin bruise over the river bend. The sandbar lay there like a tongue. The figure we'd watched in the gray stood near the far edge, half turned toward the water, head forward, like it was listening through its chest. The metallic tapping moved downriver into polite steps, never rushing, never close. Harlan slid the night optic off my sling and pressed it to his face with both hands, elbows dug into dirt. First-gen glass bloomed everything with a halo. It made stars into fuzzy coins, made leaves into a fog bank, made the figure on the sand, not a body, but a stutter of light along plates that did not want to be seen. He breathed once through his nose and let the focus drift past perfect. The trick he taught us, so edges sometimes came back. Reflection is wrong, he whispered. Winds from our rear. Leaves say so. That thing's throwing light into it. I watched the trees, not the thing. Old habit. Let movement betray itself at the edges. But the jungle had gone to church. No insects for a long 100 count. No frog sermon. Even the river sounded like it was waiting to be introduced. The handset popped once, that dry little throat-clear radios make when someone underneath a thin sheet tries not to talk. I kept my thumb off the volume. Harlan wagged 2 fingers for me to hold. He did not want our noise to teach anyone where the ridge was. He handed the optic to Reyes and looked at the sand instead. Tracks were the language here. The bar was a fresh page. Nothing on it but a slick where last night's water had crawled and gone home. If the tall one had walked across, it had left letters I could not read, or none at all. Harlan's jaw worked once. Not fear. Arithmetic. He tapped my shoulder. Boat, he mouthed, then pointed to the bend below. I could not see it yet. I could hear the memory of it, though. The way a river holds the shape of props. The engine coughed once and went quiet, right on cue, like it had been told to wait. Lon leaned in until his breath touched Harlan's sleeve. They watch, he said, voice the size of a match flame. Not hunt. If you do not block, if you do not shout. Harlan nodded without taking his eyes off the bend. He lifted one hand, crooked to 2 fingers, and traced a small box in the air. Rules. Then he tapped his vest where the pocket charges rode. Not now. The figure on the sandbar lifted its head a notch. Not to smell, not to look, but like a money rising to stand when a song ends. The skin caught the shiver of the low sky and gave it back in shards that did not belong to any decent moon. It did not face us. We were furniture. It angled toward the river as if answering a bell only it could hear. Harlan's voice went tactical, the one he used when he needed to carve fear into parts small enough to carry. If the boat rounds hot, we hold fire unless fired on. We are eyes. We are not a wall. He glanced at me. You will not key unless I touch you. Yes, Sergeant, I said, but only in my bones. He brought the optic up again and swept slow. The lens flared on dew, on spider silk, on the thin line where dawn pretended it would happen. He muttered what he saw for our picture, words clipped into inventory. Bank left clear. Sand clean. One tall at far bar. No secondary movement. Negative, stand by, the radio decided for us. A voice from down and right. River soft and scared under the courage. Brownwater, 2 to any friendly on the north ridge, do you copy? Engine dead in the bend, possible contact on the sand, request eyes. The handset seemed bigger in my hand all at once. Harlan slid 2 fingers onto the back of it. A touch light as a sermon. Wait. He scanned again. The tall one did not move. The tapping moved. Tap, space, tap, tap. It came from farther past the bend now, answering itself like 2 people having a conversation through a wall. Lon's hand found Harlan's sleeve again. Do not shine, he whispered. They do not like. Harlan nodded once. Then he gave me the smallest nod a man can give, and have it still be a command. I keyed, but I kept the gain where a mouse would have to lean in to hear. North Ridge copies. We have eyes on one figure far sand. We advise no lights. Hold position if able. I let go. Roger. The river came back, 2 feisties, 2 grateful. No lights. Holding as long as she holds us. Harlan settled into the dirt, as if he meant to become part of it. We stay dark, he said. If they wanted them gone, they'd already be. He let the silence sit. It sat like a stone. The bugs did not come back to lift it. The river did not offer to carry it away. Down below, something bumped the boat, a gentle nudge you'd give a sleeping dog to see if it would open one eye. The engine did not. The figure on the sand did not turn its head to watch. It just existed, like a piece of the bar that could get up and leave if it remembered an appointment. Sir, Reyes breathed, I have reflections in the trees 90 degrees right of the bar. Not eyes, Harlan said after a beat. Plates. He said the next part to himself. How many? He did not finish the count. He did not need to. The point was made without numbers. There were more. He touched my sleeve again. I keyed once more. Low. Brown water 2. Be advised, multiple reflections in the tree line opposite your bow. No movement toward you at this time. Recommend you make no sudden noise. We're with you. Copy, the voice said, smaller. Appreciate the company. Reyes exhaled and let the optic drop to his chest. They're not looking at us, he said. They're looking past. Past what? I said, and did not like the way nobody answered. The first honest edge of dawn finally found the river and laid a stripe on it. It made the sandbar throw a little light back. It made the tall one look briefly like a statue that hated being mistaken for one. In that breath between dark and day, I felt the ridge decide whether we belonged on it. Hold, Harlan said, soft enough the dirt could keep the word. Let the river write the next line. The radio clicked once as if to agree, and then the boat below us tried to start and failed, and the tapping answered itself from farther down. Patient as tide. They called me Duke because I could thread a boat through a rice paddy and not kiss a single stalk. I was not noble and I was not brave. I was competent, which is what keeps people alive more often than either of the first two. Dawn had not cracked yet. The river was the color of a bruise that had decided to hang around. We drifted into the bend with the engine sulking. She had coughed twice and then gone quiet, the way old dogs do when they know you will carry them anyway. Sully was on the gun, elbows loose, eyes hard. The bow threw a little ripple that ran off and told the bank we were there. The bank did not answer. Try her again, Sully said, not looking. I thumbed the starter and listened to the starter roll. The engine thought about it and changed the subject. I did not swear out loud. I saved the language for when it would help. The jungle wall on the starboard side felt too close. On the port side, the sandbar slid past as if someone had pulled the world and left us still. The air smelled like tea, steeped too long, with a metal edge that made the back of my tongue sit up and pay rent. No birds, no bugs. Even the frogs had called in sick. North Ridge, Brownwater 2, I said, pitching my voice low enough to keep the river from learning it. Copy if you're up. Engines being a politician. Static took a breath, and then a voice found us, steady as a carpenter's pencil. We copy. One figure far sand, no lights, hold if able. No lights, I said, mostly to myself. I checked the bowman's lamp and felt better when the tape was still over the switch. I had been the guy who cut that tape on other mornings when other rules were in play. Not today. Something brushed the hull. Not hard. An acquaintance trying to remember your name. The boat shifted an inch and then hunted for center again. I put a hand on the aluminum because a hand will tell you things you can miss with eyes. The vibration under my palm ran shallow, then deep, like a cat humming to itself and then remembering it had a voice. Sully did not swing the gun. He knew the rule. Do not point at what you are not ready to meet. He watched the water the way a man watches a stove flame when he suspects the gas line is bored. His breath was slow. His jaw was where it lived when things made sense, and also when they did not. Say again on the figure, he murmured, not to the radio, to the air. Describe it, without lying. I did not answer because the answer would have been a lie dressed in a uniform. I eased us with the pole, not pushing, just asking the current for a favor. The favor was considered and granted by inches. The engine smelled like it wanted to work again if the world would apologize. The bank paced us. That is the only word for it. Not creatures in the brush, not a scout keeping parallel. The wall of green itself had taken on the idea of a companion and walked with us, step for step. When you've run a river enough, you know how the trees should look when they mind their own business. These minded ours. Light pooled strange in the leaves and slid off again. Every now and then a slick shine would move through the understory, like a fish deciding it preferred trees now. Duke, Sully said, we've got the feeling. I've had it since the prop quit. I said, let them keep it. We'll mind ours. He did not smile, because we both knew humor is a candle, and some rooms don't allow fire. He shifted his weight and the gun whispered to itself. He was not aiming at anything, and also at everything. From upstream there came a sound. Tap, then a space, then tap tap. It walked down the bank in little shoes belonging to nothing. I was ready to invite on board. The sound did not echo, not properly. The trees ate it and passed it along the way. Gossips do, when they like the person being discussed. North Ridge, I said. Brownwater too. We hear your choir. We hear it too. The ridge said, voice still even. Multiple reflections in the line opposite your bow. They are not moving toward you. Reflections was a good word. It kept everybody honest. It did not name what we could not name. It did not promise more than light behaving under law. Something nudged the stern again and let go. The boat yawed a hand's width, and I corrected with the pole. The current had gone wishy-washy, pulling sideways instead of down. A good river gives you one argument at a time. This one had decided we were worth two. I felt the urge to key the mic and ask them what the ridge could see about our fate. I didn't. Harlan's kind of voice lives on a radio like that, unimpressed by pleading, allergic to panic. If he was up there, his eyes were doing math on our behalf. Math does not take requests, it takes measurements. Sully, I said, look at the sand. He did. We both did. The bar wore fresh water like a silk shirt. No prints, no hoof, no boot. But the edge of the jungle on the far side had leaves with the kind of wet sheen things get when something taller than you and me both moves through at shoulder height. The line was even, like someone had drawn it with a ruler made of patience. I'm not loving any of this, he said. You don't have to, I said. You just have to be here for it. The engine gave a single cough, a brave one, the kind men give when they don't want you to know the wound is bad. I flicked the switch again and felt the starter roll. Almost. The river's skin puckered around the bow in little dimples as something passed under us, slow as a singer holding a note. A shape came into the open on the far end of the bar. Not popping out, not bursting. Entering the scene like it owned its lines, and the stake hands owed it a favor. Tall, arms long, head forward a little, as if to meet a wind that wasn't there. The skin did that thing where it took what little light morning had, and made it into shards that felt like a bad mirror. It did not turn to us. It looked over the water like a man waiting for a ferry. It put one foot ahead of the other, and you could tell by the way it placed weight that it had never once wondered where the ground would be. There was no testing. There was only certainty warmed into motion. Sully's breath shortened, then lengthened, which is what training buys you. The ability to take the second breath in a moment that only wants to give you one. He did not shoulder the gun. He laid his hand along the receiver as if it were a tool you use to open a can and not a door. Do not shine, the ridge said in my ear. A murmur, carrying the shape of Lan's rule along for the ride. Do not shout. I wasn't planning on either. I said to no one. The tapping quit. The idea of tapping did not. It hung around like a smell. The bank on our side of the river grew stiller, which I would have told you was not possible 2 minutes earlier. The water under us made a choice and slid us a foot toward the bar, without asking whether we wanted to be closer to the thing we had no word for. I set the pole and held us off. Gentle. Like pushing against the chest of a friend you need to keep from walking into a fight. The pole met bottom and then did not. The river shifted its pocket. Come on, sweetheart, I told the engine. Because engines are like mules. They prefer terms of endearment when asked to do difficult things. I thumbed the switch. She coughed twice and then caught, weak, a voice after a long illness. I feathered the throttle. Not too much. Do not scare your luck. The figure on the bar kept walking. It reached the edge where the sand gives up, and the green begins, and the green took it back, like it had been borrowed. We were left with the river again, and each other, and the feeling that someone had just left a room after deciding we were not what they came for. Sully looked at me. I looked at him. His eyebrows asked a question that took 2 decades off both of us. I answered with a nod that said later, "We will make jokes that do not land." "Power's back," I told the ridge. "Quiet, in case quiet was the toll for leaving. We're easing out." "Copy," came the steady voice. "We're still with you." We let the current have more say. I kept the throttle a hair above idle, to pretend I was in charge. The bank paced us a few yards more, and then lost interest, the way weather loses interest in a town once it has proved a point. The frogs tried their first warm-up croaks and then thought better of it. We slid past the dead banyan, and the river widened its shoulders and forgot our names. That is how you know you are out of a thing. The place you were remembers you less than you remember it. Sully cleared his throat and set the gun to safe. He did not say what he had been about to say when the engine first quit. I did not ask. Behind us, in the corner of my eye, the sandbar held its breath and then let it out. On it stood another shape, or the same one, heel, arms long, head forward, framed by that wrong light. And whatever was under the hull gave us a last little nudge goodbye. They put me on the gun because I hit what I meant to. That used to be a simple sentence. Today it had an extra weight in the middle of it, like a stone sewn into a pocket. I set the safety where it belonged and kept my hands on the metal, the way you keep your hands on a dog that might bolt. The engine was back, but not proud about it. Duke nursed it like a man talking his friend off a ledge. The river gave us a slow lane and pretended we were in it by choice. The bank went from too close to close enough to make your neck stop trying to grow. Out on the sandbar, a figure stood like it had been waiting for us to remember it. Tall enough you do the math without wanting to. Arms long, head a little forward, like a sprinter who decided the race could come to him. The skin did that wrong mirror trick again. Light sliding over plates that were not plates I knew. I put the irons on it, because that is what I do when my brain starts making art out of fear. Sights give you a rectangle you can live in, for a few seconds. Front post, rear notch, breathe wrong on purpose, so you will remember to breathe right later. The figure fit inside my little world, and did not care that I had one. It did not see me, or it saw and did not care. It stepped along the edge of the bar, like it had a map I could not draw. The feet placed themselves without checking. No hesitation, no test step. Confidence you could stack bricks on. I let the muzzle come down an inch. The gun was heavier than it had been at dawn, not because of steel, because of math. What do you do when the thing inside your sights is a shape that does not belong to your list? Doctrine says identify. My list said stop here. The river under us gave a small approving hum, like it liked our choice. The bank that had paced us fell a half step back. The tapping did not return. My breath found its second wind. Say it, Duke said. Not a challenge, a favor. Tell it like it is, so the words can carry some of the weight. It is not looking at us, I said. It is walking past us and across its own day. He nodded, still working the throttle like it might spook. We slid another boat length. The figure went into the green as if the green had kept a place for it. The bar looked wrong without it, like a face after someone shaves a mustache you did not realize you had learned around. I kept the sights low and watched the tree line anyway. Every now and then, The underbrush glittered mean, a thin slick sliding where no water was. You tell yourself it is due learning tricks. You do not believe yourself. You keep watching. The radio from the ridge breathed a small comfort into the air. "Still with you," the voice said. I did not answer, because sometimes you do not touch a good thing when it is balancing on its own. We drifted out of the worst of it. I put the gun safe and covered it. My hands shook one notch below where a man admits it. I looked down at them, like they belonged to a guy I would have liked better yesterday. At the forward shack later, after coffee that tasted like water taught to be brave, June or July, I do not remember which, a kid with a camera walked past our pier and wasted film on everything. Boats, boots, a dog that did not belong to anyone's one, but ate from every hand. He liked to catch people mid-blink, so he could laugh when they looked like they were trying to keep a secret from their own face. He had a Polaroid that spit out little squares and made you wait while the picture learned what it had seen. He snapped 2 frames toward the bar, where we had been. He was aiming at nothing. He was aiming at the place where the story still hung in the air, like smoke you could not smell anymore. Hours later, he brought the pictures by because he liked an audience. "You boys were out there, right?" he said, and tapped the white border with a fingernail dirty from stringing tape. In the first frame, there was the sand, the water slick like oil, the line of the green where it pretends to be a wall. At the edge of the bar, in the corner, where the light pooled wrong, something blurred past the lens. Not enough to swear by. Enough to make the little bones in my ear ring again. The second frame was cleaner. The same bar a breath later. At the lip of the sand where it met the shade, the wet held 3 impressions in a row. Not boot, not hoof. 3 pads, forward, ending fine. The heel area clean, spacing too long for any tired joke. The kid laughed because he did not know what he was showing. He had caught us mid-blink from a distance. He wanted to sell the print for a beer. I bought it because I needed to hold something that was not a weapon. That night, I put the square on my chest in my rack and stared at the black above me until it learned my name. I told myself stories until one of them was soft enough to sleep on. None of my stories ended with me pulling a trigger. I used to think a man is his accuracy. Now I think a man is the line he draws and does not cross, even when his hands remember how. In the morning, I folded the Polaroid into the pocket next to my dog tags. It made a small, flat weight that my body learned like a habit. I did not show it around. I did not throw it away. When the river called again, I went. Lon walked with us without touching the ground the way we did. He placed his feet where the jungle had already agreed to hold weight. He kept a pace that let the morning find its colors without startling any of them. He was our translator when mouths were not the tools we needed. He was our guide when the map was more smell than line. We came in from the river along a path that had ideas about being a path only when locals used it. Palm fronds arched low. The earth underfoot was a patchwork of leaf mulch and damp clay that took impressions like a clerk taking notes. The air traded last night's cool for the warm coin of day. Mosquitoes wrote letters on exposed skin and expected no reply. The hamlet had been there a long time ago, and recently, both at once. Posts where wall would have been. A cooking hearth the rain had tried to erase and failed at. The square frame of a door with no door in it, more threshold than building. Bamboo leaned in, as if to apologize for winning the argument about who owned the place. Lon stopped at the edge and set his palm on a post, a gesture like greeting or request. He said something in his own language, soft, sounds that did not want my mouth. Then he turned to us and arranged English into what he needed. "Old people say Do not block their road, he said. You can see a house from the front and back, yes. But there is also an underroad. For them, not for us. He looked at the ground as if it might nod. We make our paths. They have theirs. If you put stones in their mouth, it is bad. Harlan listened with his whole face. He had the kind of respect that learned fast when he found someone who knew a landscape better than he did. Not spirits, he asked, careful. Not mocking. Just sorting categories. Lon shook his head in small degrees. Not ghost. Not soldier. Not deer. He searched for a word and chose two instead. Nightmen. But not men. He looked irritated with the word and the way it missed. He drew 3 short parallel lines in the dirt with a twig. Feet like this. Then he tapped the heel of his own hand. Palm smooth. 3 fingers. Reyes crouched and studied the dirt. He had the Polaroid folded into a pocket, the way a man might keep a saint he did not exactly believe in. We saw prints, he said. Wide. 3 forward pads. Clean lift. Lon nodded, relieved the burden of naming was not his. Ollie. They pass when it is cool, he said. They do not like our lamps. They do not like shouting. They do not admire mines. The last word had a weary humor at the edges of it. Children watched us from the trees, if children is what you call silhouettes. You are not allowed to count. A dog moved along a fence line that had no fence, tail deciding which story it preferred. The hum of commerce that defines a living village was absent, replaced by the small domestic sounds that persist after a place has been left. A pot turned to catch rain. A tangle of twine someone meant to unknot and forgot. Lon led us to a place near the river, where the bank had slumped and then reconsidered. The ground held a line of wet leaves at a height that did not match our shoulders. Water clung to them evenly, like the jungle had been painted to that line with a smooth brush. They pass, he said, not making it bigger than that. Harlan pointed at the hills, at the limestone that showed through where the green could not keep its grip. Entrances? Lon exhaled and set his hat back a bit. Many mouths, he said. Some chew only air. Some drink rivers. Some are like wells with a sideways. He paused, listening for how the words sounded now that they were outside him. One is close. Old people did not go there. Young people went and learned why old people were old. We followed him along a contour that kept us from announcing ourselves to everything that liked to listen. The jungle here had a way of arranging light into columns that felt like rooms. You could believe you were inside, then step 1 pace and be on a stage. Lon kept us in the hallways. The smell we knew found us before the geometry did. Rotten egg, metallic tang, old water. It traveled in a cool thread that ignored the day's warm logic. It touched the back of the throat and told your stomach to think twice about lunch. Lon lifted his chin. Breath, he said, from the underroad. The mouth showed itself the way a careful animal does, at an angle, from behind a screen of vine and root, offering you the idea of itself before the fact. The opening was not big enough to swallow a squad whole. It was big enough to make a mate feel like a door had just taken a breath and waited for his answer. The edges were too neat for accident, and too uneven for craft. You could see work in it, not from tools you knew. Harlan stood just outside the cool line and put his hand into the draft. He did not lean in. He let the air move across his fingers and teach him what it wanted to teach. In and out, he asked. Lon nodded. When river is high, it drinks. When low, it breathes out. Today it is like the lungs of a sleeping buffalo. He was pleased with the image and then a little ashamed of the pleasure. Reyes drew a circle in the dirt with the toe of his boot, then 3 lines across it, like the symbol for a pie he did not want to eat. We don't block, he said, half to Lon, half to Harlan, half to the part of himself that kept rules when nobody else did. No blocking, Lon said, firm now. No stones, no fire at the mouth, no shouting. He held up a hand before Harlan could ask. You can shoot if you must. But if you shoot, you go. You do not wait to see if your shooting was good. He met our eyes one by one to see if the humor landed where it should. It did not. He let it go. We took a knee a few yards back. The smell made the bugs readjust their opinions of us. The cave's breath cooled sweat into lines on our faces. Inside, just past where light gives up and guesses take over, a mist hung like gauze on a theater set. If you stood long enough, you could believe it was moving on its own instead of on the air. Harlan looked at the rock around the mouth, the way a man looks at a wall he might someday have to cut through. His fingers played an absent-minded scale on the pocket where he kept charges. He did not take them out. He did not touch the tape. He only let the thought pass across his face so he would recognize it later if it came back wearing different clothes. Lon saw the look because he was good at the language of hands. When the ground has a throat, he said gentle, but not soft, you do not put your fist in it. You will not like the bite. I did not want to go in. This is a useful admission a man can make to himself and to keep moving anyway. The under-road's mouth was an invitation written in a script I did not read. It promised answers I did not trust. It promised questions I did not want. We pulled back the way you leave a sleeping animal under a house, quiet, respect. No sudden light. The jungle took us into itself, happy to be our excuse. The path reappeared because Lon wanted it to. The river's voice found a notch in the day and tried it out. We reached the hamlet again and paused at the open doorway that was not a doorway. Lon looked at the threshold and then at us. My grandmother, he said, would spit before stepping. Not to insult. To say, here is my water, I come honest. He did not spit it. He touched 2 fingers to his tongue and set them on the wood. Old rules are for people who plan to be old, he added, maybe to himself. We crossed the square that used to be a square. Duke and Sully came up from the bank, Boots picking up the story and carrying it without asking. Duke's face wore that careful blank that says a man has put a strange thing somewhere safe for later. Sully looked like he was listening for a sound I could not hear. Engine lives, Duke said. She'd like not to be tested again today. Noted, Harlan said. He pointed with his chin toward the slope. Entrance up there. Breathing. Don't block it, Lon said, because the words had to be said out loud to count. Duke's eyes flicked to him and back. Wouldn't dream of it, he said. He might have meant it. We were getting ready to move when the smell freshened like someone had wrung out a rag soaked in it. It came down the slope in a cool sigh. The bugs, shut up in patches. The dog under the knot fence decided it had somewhere else to be and did not explain. Lon held up one hand without looking at us. He pointed with 2 fingers at the line of trees past the last hut. They come, he said. Not warning. Weather report. We did not form a wall. Harlan made sure of that with a small motion, palms down, easing us into positions that were not a block. We became furniture again, the kind that sits along the edges of a room to keep the walls from feeling lonely. Weapons low, safeties where they belonged, eyes soft enough to take in the whole picture. The first shape moved through the shade a dozen paces beyond the doorway frame. It did not hurry. It did not sidle. It took the space that had always been its and made no case for it. Tall, arms long, head forward. The wrong light trickery hung on it, like it traveled with its own weather. In the wet earth near the cooking hearth, 3 forward pads set down and picked up, without wobble. The edge of each left a crescent, like a careful knife had been there a second, and then apologized. Lon did not bow. He did not freeze. He put his hand on the post again, the way you steady yourself when a train passes close. His voice was for him, not them. "We see," he said, in his language and then in ours. "We will not block." The shape did not look at him. It did not look at us. It glanced, if that is what you call a tilt of the head, that suggests attention in a face you are not allowed to read, toward the low path where the river showed a thin gleam. Another moved behind it, then another, spacing them even. Confidence, HD casual. The line of wet leaves took on a brighter gloss as shoulders brushed by. The air cooled another degree. I could feel a question cresting in all of us at once. What happens if one of them decides we are not furniture? The answer hovered and did not land. They passed through the ruined square like morning moving through a room. They left it arranged the way they had found it, which was mostly absence and a promise the jungle intended to keep. The smell receded on the next exhale from the mouth up the slope. The bugs argued about coming back, and then did, one at a time. Lon let a breath go that had been sitting with him since before we were born. He glanced at Harlan. "We go," he said. "They do not like when we stand and count. Counting is a kind of blocking." We went, bodies remembering how to be in a day again. The path found the river. The river remembered our names in the small way it does when it is busy. Duke eased us aboard. Sully set the gun where it belonged and then rested his hand on it, like you might keep a restless horse from thinking of fences. As we pushed off, that cool draft ran down the slope one more time and found the back of my neck. It felt like the note in a song that tells you the chorus is coming. On the far bend, out where the water makes a promise to go on, whether you ask it to or not, the radio coughed. A voice shapes itself when it knows it will need to be brave. "North Ridge," it said, "we're at the lip of your sandbar. Something has interested the tree line." Harlan looked up at the slope where the mouth breathed, and then down at the handset where the boat asked for company. He did the arithmetic and spent the breath it required. "Copy," he said. "We're with you." The smell thinned. The bugs rehearsed their busy little opera. The cave took its breath back. And from somewhere, we could not see yet, the way thunder sometimes laughs, before you know where the lightning has chosen, deliberate tapping began. By noon the heat had made a bargain with the shade. We took the deal and moved along the limestone ribs where vines hung like curtains trying to learn their lines. The jungle here liked right angles in a way that made you suspicious. Trees squared themselves. Shadows laid out in tidy rectangles. You could feel the stone under everything like a floor in a house, pretending not to be a house. Lon guided us by negative space. "Not this way," he'd say, by not saying anything and just letting his shoulder tilt. We followed the tilt. Reyes read the ground with the same patience he used on men. Duke and Sully kept the river in their ears the way sailors do even when the water is a hill away. My radio sweated against my back and muttered small to itself. The smell told us, before the rock did. That cool egg-rot breath slid across our cheeks from where the slope gathered itself. It carried metal and old water, and the idea of distance measured sideways. Bugs argued and lost. The air temperature stepped down one notch, as if we had walked into another room without meaning to. The entrance waited behind a page of vine, not a cave mouth the size of a church, not the kind you put on a postcard. A door, cut patient, edges too even to be chance and too uneven to be proud. The rock wore marks that were not chisel and not claw, as if pressure had been applied over time by something that understood stone the way a river understands a bend. Harlan stopped at the threshold and did what good leaders do when presented with a thing that wants to be made into a problem. He let it stay a thing a minute longer. Palms open, breath steady. He leaned forward just enough to feel the wind coming out. then leaned back like a man who has learned what he needed and will pay for more information later. Karst, he said, half to us, half to the rock. Limestone that drinks water and forgets where it put it. Bombs shake it awake. Rivers get lost in it. Rivers find themselves in it again. He had picked up geology like a field-expedient language. He spoke it respectfully, with an accent. Lon stood a step off to the side and kept his hat in his hands. Many mouths, he said softly. This one is not hungry. But it is not sleeping either. Reyes eased up to the vine and pinched a strand, then let it go. The leaves trembled and settled. Inside, past the gray limit of our eyes, a mist hung where it had chosen to hang. It was not fog off water. It was the kind of fine wet that collects where stone and breath negotiate. I looked at Harlan's vest and found the outline of the charges without meaning to. He saw my eyes see it and gave the smallest headshake you can give and have it still be a command. Not today. Not like this. The cave exhaled again. The draft wrapped my neck like a damp cloth, then went on to consider someone else. The smell brought back metal spoons, a mess tent, eggs boiled too long. It also brought something older my mind did not have drawers for. The hair on my forearms made its position clear. Rules, Lon said, as if reading a sign none of us could see. No stones, no lights straight in, no shouting. He weighed the last one. Whisper is also shouting. Here. We stepped back a couple paces to keep from being the answer to a question we had not heard yet. Harlan squatted and laid his hand on the ground the way he had earlier, feeling for tremor, for the story the soil tells when it thinks nobody is listening. He nodded once, a carpenter checking a level. It breathes regular, he said. That is a mercy. The jungle around us had gone asthmatic small, careful noises in between long holds. A cicada wound itself up and then decided today was not the day to be a radio. A lizard did push-ups on a hot rock because that is what lizards do when men are trying to have a feeling. Duke broke the silence with a thought so practical it felt like rain. If we needed to pull a man out of there, how many minutes of line do we carry, he said. As many as we brought, Reyes answered, dry, and touched the coil on his kit, as if to promise it would not be him at the end of it. I eased the handset up to my ear because the air felt like a wire, and I wanted to hear if it carried current. Static settled like dust. No voice yet. The river would talk when it was ready. Harlan rose and did the threshold ritual again. One step forward. One hand held into the cool like a blind man, learning the room. Then a step back to where the sun worked. He looked at Lon. Places with breath, Lon said, are like buffalo when they sleep. If you touch their nose, you must be ready to run. If you do not touch, they may keep dreaming and forget you were here. Harlan's mouth twitched at the corners. Agreement and amusement, a ration of each. He turned to us. We mark it. We don't make it ours. We leave it the way we found it. Reyes unscrewed a cap and dabbed a dot of grease pencil on a rock where only we would read it. Nothing that would make a map scream to anyone else. A breadcrumb for men who might need to come back without repeating sins. I could feel the hook in the air, the part of the day that catches and keeps you, whether you meant to be kept. The light had thinned at the cave lip, not darker, just crowded. The breath coming out hit a new note, lower, less patient. Then from inside, not echo, not water footfalls, not boots, not paws. Deliberate weight placed and lifted on stone, slow enough to count without pretending, far enough that the sound came folded, like it had passed around corners made for it, near enough that my chest knew the beat before my ears did. Lon did not move. Harlan did not move. Nobody shouldered anything. We became the furniture again, the kind that does not block a doorway, only defines the room. The footfalls came on for another dozen counts, then stopped. The cave breathed out, cool and sour. The jungle held its breath to see who would speak first. Harlan's voice ran low and even. A man reading a level bubble and not liking what it said, but trusting it anyway. "We are not a wall," he said. "We are eyes. We are leaving." We left the threshold the way you leave a sleeping animal, backward, polite, on the boards. When the vines swung back into place, the entrance was only an idea again. The breath found our backs like a reminder, and then forgot us. On the way down the slope, the radio stirred, cleared its throat, and offered us a line from the river that sounded a lot like fate asking for a time check. The radio gave one small cough and went shy. I kept the handset where I could kiss it if I had to. We were halfway down the slope when Harlan stopped us with the kind of stillness that makes a new kind of silence. He didn't look back at the mouth. He didn't have to. The breath from it found our necks and changed its mind about the temperature. I turned, and the vines were already moving, just a little, like a curtain remembering it could be a curtain. Two shapes stepped into the edge of our seeing. Not all the way out. Just enough to be present. Just enough for the world to register an answer to a question we hadn't voiced. Tall. Taller than the frame would like. Arms long. Head forward a few degrees as if listening with the face. Not antler. Not horn. A hooded crown. Smooth. Tapered. Like the front edge of a swimmer's cap. Skin in one piece, no seam. No shirt. No gear plates that were not plates. Catching noon and handing it back wrong. The air around them felt organized. The way air does around a big rock in a fast stream. Eyes forward. Not on the sides like a deer. Front, too. The human brain keeps a drawer for that. Mine opened it without asking permission. No one spoke, no one needed to. The rules were already walking among us. No shouting, no lights, no blocks to oasis. But rules are a bridge. You still have to decide to cross. The nearer one tilted its head, a hair. If there was a mouth, I could not find it. If there was a nose, it did not take turns the way ours do. The smell egg, metal, old water wrote its name across my tongue, and waited. Reyes had his rifle low, but ready in a way that does not promise anything, and also promises everything if the day insists. Harlan's right hand was open, the palm down, the sermon for patience. His left had drifted toward the charges without landing. Lon stood with his hat low, and his hand on the post of air that was not there, as if that's how you steady a moment. We gave them space. We let ourselves be furniture. The second shape leaned into the light, another inch, and the surface of it shivered like a school of fish turning as one. Not scales. Not exactly. Just too many small decisions happening under one skin. The radio decided to live for half a second. Brownwater 2, North Ridge. Then it clipped itself off, as if it had learned manners. The nearer shape took one slow step. Not toward us. Not away. The kind of step you take when you test a floor you already know will hold. 3 forward pads met the dirt, set and lifted without wobble. The crescents at the end of each impression were clean, knife neat. The heel left nothing I could teach a boot to do. My thumb found the selector without my help. My sight picture built itself. Little world inside 2 posts and a notch. The front post rose to center chest because that is what muscle memory buys you. There was no chest. There was a field of wrong light. Harlan didn't say don't. He didn't say do. He was a hinge the door could turn on. Either way. The second shape angled its face so the eyes were a line I could feel on my own. Not hostile. Not kind. Attention. A mirror that doesn't show you. Only the space you take up. I heard my own safety go off. A small click that sounded like a hammer in a museum. Hold. Harlan said, soft enough the dirt could keep the word. Something moved behind them in the fog of the entrance, a third presence undecided about being counted. The breath came out cooler, thicker. The vines lifted a fraction, as if the cave were inhaling and getting ready to speak. The first burst went before I knew whose it was. Reflex is a greedy landlord. It collects what the body owes. A 3-round string cut the air into rectangles and turned the scene into white noise. My own finger took the second beat, because that is what hands do through when they are trained to rhyme. Light stuttered on plates and threw sparks like struck flint. The sound slapped the rock and came back thinner. The smell of powder stacked itself on top of egg and metal, until the whole day tasted like a battery. The near shape tipped, not knocked, like you'd nudge a refrigerator to see if it was empty. It did not hurry. It did not roar. It took one step backward, the way a confident man decides a doorway is big enough to share. Cease, Harlan said. And the word found our wrists faster than it found our ears. Silence happened again, in a way only the jungle can do. Total and unashamed. The vines settled. The breath from the mouth changed keys. The two shapes slid a pace into the threshold's gray and stood there, large as a decision you will have to live with. The third presence held. Reyes exhaled like he'd been holding something since he was born. Lon's hat brim did not move. Duke and Sully were stone in the brush behind me. On the dirt between us, a single brass case lay humming to itself, hot as a small coin. Then, from somewhere no one could point to, the metallic tapping answered what we had just done. Tap. A space long enough to regret. Tap, tap. The figures did not flinch. They watched the space we took up in the day. And something behind us in the green decided to watch too. Reyes here. I never liked talking about what bullets do. I liked talking about what they don't. In training, they tell you the world obeys when Copper asks a question. Today the world shrugged. After the first burst, the light off those plates didn't bloom like meat. It flared like we'd struck rock underwater. Tiny star points. Sparks that had no business in wet air. Sound came back wrong. Toothin'. Like it had to squeeze through a narrow throat before it could reach us. The two at the mouth took the hits like a man takes rein he had already planned to walk through. No stagger. No jerk. 1/2 step back, a recalculation. Then still. Not frozen. Choosing stillness. That was worse. My sights were back up without me asking. I found center mass and discovered there wasn't one. Not the way textbooks want you to think. A field of sheen and angles. I picked a joint instead, where the long arm met the body, and let the front post settle there with all the patience I owned. Nothing in me wanted to shoot again. Everything I had learned wanted to make sure I could. Cease, Harlan said, and it sat in my bones like law. I breathed. The safety found itself because I wasn't going to trust my finger to virtue twice in one afternoon. The air at the mouth went colder, denser, as if the cave had pulled the heat out of our little clearing for the privilege of watching. The third presence behind the first two edged forward until the mist made it a suggestion more than a fact. I could count the distance by the way the smell grew teeth. The metallic tapping marched one polite step closer from downslope and then stayed where it was, like a neighbor who wants you to know he heard, but isn't about to join the argument. Tap. Wait. Tap, tap. Each note landed on the same piece of bone inside my ear. I cut a sliver of my attention loose and let it drift behind us like a kite. The jungle had arranged itself into angles again. Right angles that didn't belong out here. Shadow in neat rectangles. You can read that as geology, or you can read it as attention. Either way, it makes the small muscles around the eyes ask for reassignment. Duke whispered something to Sully that sounded like a prayer and a bet. Lon had his hat brim low and his hand on empty air, the way you hold the shoulder of a friend who needs to know you haven't left. He said one word I recognized. Please, not to us. I put my palm to the ground because hands tell better truth than eyes when the day starts lying. I felt the smallest tremor, not from the mouth, from behind Yusuf's weight, settling into a stance, not a step. Whatever had decided to watch was not creeping. It was setting up to see. Behind I breathed and tilted 2 fingers where Harlan could catch them, without the figures at the mouth, thinking we had forgotten our manners. He didn't look. He nodded. Eyes wide, he said, no flinch. The near figure rotated that hooded crown a fraction and checked our corners, like a man who knows how a room can fail. Not contempt, not curiosity. Inventory. The forward-facing eyes passed over my little square of sight and made me feel like a diagram. Object A, in position B, with unknown intentions. I realized then that every barrel in our line was a kind of wall, even pointed at the dirt. Lon's rules don't live on paper. They live in geometry, so we were making a shape the day didn't want. Lower, Harlan said, and set the example, muzzle kissing the ground, palms open. The posture of a man who knows what force can do and is choosing not to do it. It wasn't surrender. It was excavation, digging for a way to stand that didn't block. I followed. The knot in my neck loosened enough for blood to remember how to be warm. The second figure in the mouth did something I will be measuring against for the rest of my life. It unchose us, not dismissing, deciding we were not its work. The tension that had made the vines buzz eased 1 notch. The third presence stayed a suggestion, as if the threshold had rules about how many of them could be in the doorway at once. Over my shoulder, leaf on leaf whispered, not wind, wait. I did not turn. I let the ground tell me where it stood. 10 paces back and right, inside a screen of bamboo that had forgotten how to be noisy. The watcher behind us was tall, based on where the leaves took on that even wet gloss. It took in our angle and theirs, and kept the day balanced with the kind of attention you give a bridge with trucks on it. I thought then, stupidly and right on time, about bullets. About what they do when they meet bone, when they meet steel, when they meet ceramic. I had a new category in my head now. What they do when they meet a decision. Back, Harlan said, voice made of field. We are leaving. We will not block. He did not say sorry. He did not say thank you. He didn't make it a human exchange. He made it a movement problem with a solution. We eased. Not retreat, not egress. Just negative space sliding. Palms down, eyes wide, muzzles low, so the math hurt less. Every step we set down we took back, if a vine tried to claim it with a tug. The figures at the mouth did not track us with their heads. They let our shape get smaller, without changing theirs. When we crossed the line where the breath from the cave lost interest, I felt my shoulders remember what they were for. At the last tree before the slope bent us out of sight, I allowed myself 1 measure of curiosity. I tilted my head until I could see the dirt we'd fought not to add to. Brass lay there in a small bright line, like a timeline that didn't go forward. The impressions in the damp earth were clean. No smear, no stagger. The crescences at the tips were knife-cut. The heel was absence. Tap. From downslope, a reply to a conversation we were no longer in. Behind us, the watcher in the green let 1 leaf spring back into its proper place. A little noise, the kind the jungle makes when it is satisfied the furniture is where it should be. We took the slope in careful halves. Half a dozen yards down, the radio found its courage and cleared its throat for real. Duke's boys on the river wanted to know if they were alone. Not alone, Harlan said, Once we reached a place where the ground would keep his words and not deliver them anywhere else. But not Persid. I checked my magazine because Dianity likes rituals. I counted breaths, then let the count go. I let my hands hang until they remembered they weren't needed to hold the world up. Behind my sternum, a new rule settled in beside the old ones. If the day offers you a way to not be a wall, take it. If the thing in front of you unchooses you, unchoose the fight back. Ahead, the river put a little light on its own back and asked us to come trade one kind of fear for another. I was happy to let it. The river looked ordinary. That was the trick. Black coffee with a little oil on top, rolling its shoulders like it had nothing to hide. We came into the band with the engine on good behavior, and then she quit with the politeness of a man who stands up before he faints. Hold, I told her, which is not how engines work. Sully didn't answer. He had the gun low, elbows easy, eyes on the green. We drifted. The current put a hand on our back and guided us to the slow lane like a traffic cop who had decided we were not ready for the highway. The dead banyan on the far bank kept its stories to itself. The sound that wasn't sound arrived first. A hush that felt arranged. Bugs wrote one sentence and then crossed it out. The frogs, who are usually incapable of silence, found religion. I have never liked being looked at. You'd think with a job like mine I'd be used to it. Today, the looking had weight. It came in layers. It started as a feeling, then became a fact. They were along the bank. Not in front, not behind. From the low ferns to the first crooked trunks, spaced like fence posts. Tall, arms long, heads a little forward, like listeners. Dozens. They did not lean. They did not sway. They did not seem to breathe in a way you can time. I did not bring the sights up. I let my hands be heavy at my sides and made friends with the stupid urge to run my thumb along the receiver. It is a nervous habit, dressed as maintenance. They didn't reach for us. They didn't even look like the word reach belonged to them. They just watched the shape we made in the water and let us be our sis. The engine turned over one beat, and then decided it had been a different kind of day in another life. I did not curse, which is growth. I checked the choke I don't have, which is habit. The starter clicked once as if to sign its name, and went still. We're drifting, sweet, I said. Because tone sets tone. Sully gave me the smallest nod the human neck can give, and still count as a nod. A line ran off our stern. The kind you keep coiled right until you need it right. It lifted and set itself back down 3 inches to the left, as if the river had remembered a simple trick. Current, I said. And, Sully said. We both understood that both things could be true. They were not a mob. Mobs tell on themselves. Noise, heat. This was a room full of statues that had agreed to blink if we blinked first. Light slid on them in thin sheets. The wrong reflection made it look like water was running uphill through leaves. I checked the sandbar to unspook my head. Clean. No prints. That was a comfort, and then not. The line where the green started wore that fresh, wet shine, shoulder high to a man who is not built like a man. Something under the hull decided to speak in the language of touch. A bump like a friend with a joke he can't tell in front of your boss. The boat shifted, then held. The stern line tightened a hair and did not slack again. Don't, I told my hands. They listened. North Ridge, I hissed just above water. We've got an audience. The reply came soft, even. We see them. No movement toward you. Hold. No lights. No lights. The tape over the bow switch felt like a friend. I tried the starter one more time, because ritual is how men vote when the ballot is fear. The engine coughed, considered, and declined. Fine. Okay. We would do this in drift. I gave the pole a gentle set, to keep our bow pointed at the part of the river that still believed in downstream. The pole found bottom, then did not. Something slid under it and moved on without apology. My job is to make small things big. Sights, posts, angles. Today my job was to make big things smaller. I cut the scene into squares and stared at each until it stopped being a person and became a task. It did not work. A low sound walked the shoreline. Tap. A space for thinking. Tap, tap. Not closer, not farther, just present. The watchers did not shiver at it. Neither did the leaves. Only my nerves. The stern line twitched again. Not a snag, a grip. A test to see what we are made of. Let it be, Duke said. What do you think I'm doing? I said, and heard the laugh I wasn't having sit down in me. We slid by the part of the bank where last week a water buffalo had decided the river's bargain wasn't worth it, and turned back. Not today. Today everything took the deal. Even us. One of the tall ones turned its face a fraction and made a line between me and it that did not feel like line of sight. It felt like a plumb bob dropped through my ribs. I kept my hands visible. I kept my breath, loud enough for my own ears and quiet enough for the banks. The boat made little water noises that read as polite. Engine would be nice, I told the air, because asking small favors of the world is free. The world ignored me. Fair. I don't know how many there were. Enough to fill a man's quiet. More than the number you say out loud when you want to sleep later. 12 and more. 24 if you count the shadows that thought about it, and then decided to wait for next time. They let us drift. They did not shorten the distance. They did not lengthen it. They held us exactly where we were meant to feel the lesson and not mistake the teacher. The stern line tugged once, steady, like a knot checking itself. Then it went slack, with a grace that made my shoulders hurt. She caught. Not proud, not loud. The engine spun once, and then found the piece of herself that remembered how. I eased the throttle, like you soothe a horse at the edge of a bridge. We gathered speed the way you gather your name after someone shouts it in a crowd. The bank kept pace for 12 heartbeats and then lost interest. The tapping stayed with the trees. The watchers stood in their stations the way men stand at railings after the ship pulls away. Not waving. Not. Don't look back, I told myself. And then I did. Because that is what people do. I looked with the corner that gets blamed for things later. The bar was clean again. The line of green still wore its bright shoulder. One figure near the far edge stood like a landmark on a map that doesn't exist yet. I put the gun safe, because the thing needs a ceremony to end. My hands stopped trying to make meaning and settled for holding on. We were not chased. We were not dismissed. We were allowed. Ridge, this is too, I said, keeping it quiet for the river's sake. We've got power and we're easing out. Copy, came the voice that likes to be calm for you. We're still with you. The boat hummed the way a good tool hums when you ask the right amount. The dead banyan fell behind us, and the bend forgot our names. Only then did I let the breath go that I had been renting since dawn. The stern line sank in the wake and wrote a little S on the water like a signature. For a second it hung there, tighter than it should have been. Then it loosened by itself, a knot deciding it preferred daylight to whatever had held it a breath ago. I was raised to fix things. You don't always get to choose the tool. Sometimes the tool is a hammer, and the problem gets nervous when it sees you coming. We came back up the slope because the day had not decided without us. The mouth breathed the same cool wrong. Vines hung their tired curtains. The damp had learned our names and was ready to use them. Lon stood to my left with his hat off, which he did when he wanted the world to hear him better. Do not block, he said, not a plea yet. A reminder. Road is for going and coming. I hear you. I said I did. I also heard the other thing, the part of me that sleeps fine when a door is latched. We had men on a river who would drift past this place again. We had orders that did not cover what to do when the ground breathed at you like an animal. Reyes laid out the canvas roll. 2 satchel charges ease, timer caps in a tin that used to hold peaches. Tape, twine. The world reduces clean under good kit. You can make it into parts that behave. We can set it to push, he said, eyes on the rock. Not me, not collapse, just throw rubble across the lip. Buy us distance. Lon shook his head once, twice, small eatfuls, like a man refusing a drink from someone he respects. If you punch a buffalo in the nose while it sleeps, he said, you will not like its dream when it wakes. I don't like it awake either, I said, and heard how that sounded. Duke and Sully held the perimeter by pretending to be trees with better posture. Mac kept the handset low, listening for the river to decide it needed us. The jungle wrote small notes and then erased them. I walked the lip. Not close. Close enough to read the rock where it showed its grain. The edges had work in them, not done with a tool I could name. Pressure, patience, time. It felt wrong to call it a tunnel. It felt right to call it a choice. Sergeant, Reyes said quiet. We can rig and not light. Keep it in our pocket. That was the kind of compromise that lets a man pretend he has not compromised. I nodded anyway. Build it clean. No surprises if we need it. Lon stepped in front of me the way a son steps in front of his father when the old man has the wrong jacket for the weather. This place, he said, tapping his chest with 2 fingers, belongs to itself. If you block, the underroad will make a new mouth. Maybe in your house, you cannot know. He swallowed whatever else he had planned to say and finished smaller. Please. He had not used that word yet. It landed where it needed to. It did not end the problem. I set my hand on the cool breath and let it tell me how sure it was. Lungs of a sleeping buffalo, he'd said. It felt like that. A rhythm that did not care about my watch. Timer on 3 minutes, I told Reyes. Only if I say. He nodded and went quiet the way men do when the day has sharpened to one edge. We posted a man on either flank. No lights, no talk. The smell turned up half a notch, as if the cave had heard us counting. The mist just inside the lip thickened until it forgot whether it was air. Reyes taped 2 charges under the overhang, where the fuck would catch its own wreckage. He ran twine to a dead man's stake and tucked the timer under a ledge out of curiosity's reach. His hands were careful. Careful is faster later. Lon stood with his hat crushed in one fist and stared at the ground until it offered him a better outcome. It didn't. Sergeant, he said. Last try. We leave. We tell others the rule. We make fence with words, not stone. I'm making both, I said, and hated how much of me liked the sound. Mac's radio woke long enough to cough a line from the river. 2 is clear of the bend, the ridge said from somewhere else. All quiet. He let the handset breathe with the jungle. He looked at me. He did not blink. We were at the part of the day where there is nothing left to do but decide. I put my thumb on the timer cap and did not turn it. The motion itself felt like a shout. The mouth breathed out, and the draft wrapped my wrist cold. Patient. It didn't tug. It touched. On your word, Reyes said. I looked at Lon. He did not lower his eyes. He had the kind of courage that doesn't make a story in anyone else's bar. If you must, he said, throat tight, then you must go after. You do not stand and see what your stone did. That is how trouble learns your face. I nodded because some rules are old for a reason. If it goes, we go. I turned the cap. The timer started with a small tick. You feel more than here. 3 minutes. A long time when you've bought it yourself. We fell back to the first cover that still left us a line on the lip. Not to admire our work, to make sure the work happened to the rock and not to us. Palms down, safety's where they belong. No chatter. The mouth breathed out again, and the mist moved like a curtain pushed by a hand that didn't intend to touch fabric. The vines lifted a finger's width. The smell went metallic, then older. At 1 minute, the jungle went to church. Birds shut up mid-word. Bugs cut the lights. The river down the hill forgot to finish the sentence it had been saying all morning. At 2 minutes, Reyes touched the twine the way a mod touches a grave he built and hates. Tension's good, he said, because you speak in work when your other words would make you slow. At 2.5, Lon said something in his language that had the shape of permission and apology. He did not offer it to me. At 2:50 the mist parted, as if a large chest had taken a breath. A shape stepped forward into the shiver of noon, just enough to be counted. Tall, arms long, hooded crown, plates that were not plates, giving the light back in splinters that made the air look like a bad mirror. Eyes forward, attention set like a level. It didn't rush. It didn't plead. It came to the line where shadow turns to fact and stood as if to see better. The timer ticked again, louder, because my blood had made a drum for it. "Sergeant?" Reyes asked, and never took his eyes off the lip. Lon's hat creaked in his hand. 2 seconds became 1. Then the shape tilted its face as if to look back at us. And the timer gave its last small click. 3 minutes is a country. You can walk around in it and forget where the border was. Then the last second shows you the fence. The charge went. No flash for me. Just a shove in the chest and the world hiccuped. Sound stacked on sound. Rock hit rock. Air tried to find a way out of itself. The vines jumped. The dust came at us like a gray animal, and then decided we weren't the point. We were already moving. Harlan had said it, and we did it. Down the slope, palms low, faces turned just enough to keep the eyes. Rhea's twine snapped itself clean, like it wanted to be done with us. Lon did not run. He moved in a straight line through a crooked place and made it look easy. The cave exhaled. Not wind, not weather. A lung emptying. Cold rolled over our backs the way a wave slides off a flat beach and goes nowhere. The smell got teeth-ache, metal, wet stone, and then bit through and was gone. We took a knee at the first cover that would not become part of the problem. Ears rang, mouths tasted like a battery. I watched leaves settle in slow motion and felt my heartbeat land in a chair. Dust hung. It learned the trees. It forgot us. Then from inside, farther in, then the charges could count a sound. Not the tapping, not a rock. A low chorus, as if a throat the size of a valley had chosen one note and held it. It came through the new rubble and the old stone, and found the small bones in my ear and tuned them. It wasn't loud. It was everywhere. It went on long enough to be a decision. Then it stopped. The jungle did not applaud. The bugs didn't come back right away. The river remembered. It had a sentence to finish, and you say. The world worked its way toward pretending again. No counting, Lon said, almost to himself. We go. We went. Not running, not strolling. The way men leave a room where they have said too much. At the hamlet, the doorway with no door was just wood in a shape. The dog under the knot fence slept like it had forgiven the day. Duke and Sully came up from the bank, with boat on their shoulders that only they could feel. Reyes checked the pocket where he had folded the picture and didn't take it out. No one talked about what the sound was. We talked about water. We talked about stoops. We talked about where the sun would be when we hit the bend. Back at the river, The engine gave us enough, and we asked for no more. The bank minded its own business, in the way a man minds it after reminding you he knows where you live. The sandbar was only sand. The wrong light had found somewhere else to be wrong. We made the base by late day. The forward shack smelled like coffee that had made compromises ease. Someone's radio sang a song it didn't know the words to. A clerk asked for times and places in boxes that were ready for answers. Harlan looked at the boxes and put his hand flat on the counter as if it were warm. "Patrol, routine," he said. "No contact." The clerk nodded like a man who likes tidy. He stapled a blank to another blank and set it aside where blanks go. I showered until the water forgot my name. I sat on my rack until my thumbstick decided to be under me again. I held the handset in my lap like it was a pet that had wandered back on its own. Night came on with the kind of speed you get when a day wants to be over. The base generator coughed and then steadied. The jungle outside the wire rehearsed its opera. I waited for the chorus in my ear to come back. It didn't. I slept without dreaming, which is its own kind of dream. In the morning, my boots were where I left them, and the Polaroid in my pocket had not changed. The hole up on the ridge would be a pile of rock with breath under it. The river would bend where it always had. I did not write anything down. No one did. The light through the tent wall looked honest. It was not moonlight. The forward base at dusk is a machine that runs on paperwork and coffee that has forgotten who it used to be. Fans cut the air into quarters. The plywood walls wore thumbprints, the way old Bibles wear notes. Somebody's transistor radio tried a song and lost the chorus halfway through. We came in dusty and quiet, which is how you come in when you are not sure the day believes you. The duty clerk had a stack of forms and a face that liked when lines got filled. He slid us the usual: patrol start, patrol end, contact remarks. The boxes waited like hungry mouths. "Routine," I said. My voice did not ask a question. "No contact." He nodded and wrote it for me, careful block letters that made the page behave. He stapled a blank to a blank and put the packet in a tray that had learned to look satisfied. A captain with new boots and old eyes drifted in, like a man who hadn't planned to. He looked at us, the way a doctor looks at a waiting room. "Afternoon," he said. He was not asking what kind. "Anything to report?" "No, sir," I said. He nodded once and then nodded again. "Nothing to report," he said, as if he were reminding the room. He wasn't looking for more. He was making sure less stayed, less get chow. Lon stood at the door and took off his hat, because the room wanted it. He looked at the captain, and then at me, and put the hat back on, slow, not rude. You can be fluent and still choose not to speak. In the tent I laid my kit out in a row, like a small country at peace. Rifle, webbing. The tin that used to hold peaches and now held things that change rock into other shapes. I touched each, the way a man counts children in a crowded station. Reyes sat on his rack and unlaced his boots, like they were arguments he had decided not to finish. He patted his breast pocket, found the square of the Polaroid, and left it where it was. "Chow," he said without appetite or hope. "In a minute," I said. I meant it, and I didn't. Duke and Sully wandered through the flap, with the smell of river still on them, and the look people get when the river has looked back. Max set his radio case down, like it might be sleeping. He had that dazed, decent face boys bring back from places the paperwork doesn't list. I went to wash the day off and came back to the tent that was almost the same. The fans wrote their little letters in the hot air. The canvas roof popped and sighed. Somebody laughed 2 tents over. A clean sound that didn't ask where it came from. Mac had the radio torn down in the practiced way Men tear down and rebuild a thing to turn nervousness into steps. He lined his spare spools in a neat row. He checked the handset. He checked the chords. He made a small world in which everything either worked or could be made to. He reached for the spool he always keeps in the side pocket, the one he uses when he wants the voices later to be more than voices. His hand came up empty. He didn't say anything. He checked the pocket again, because that is what you do when a fact arrives uninvited. Then he checked the other pocket, the one he never uses for that, and then the case, under the flap, under the coil, inside the little tin he keeps for things that don't belong anywhere else. I watched his face find out and keep its manners. He swallowed. He looked at me like a kid looks at a road sign in a language he almost reads. "Sergeant," he said, quiet enough that the tent would keep it. "My tape, it's gone." I tried to sleep like a man who hadn't lost anything. Cot, blanket, boots under, radio case by my knee. The tent made old canvas noises, oops, sighs, a tick when the ridgepole shifted. Somebody's fan cut the air into little squares and handed them out stingy. The missing tape felt bigger than it was. A small empty is the worst kind. It invites other blanks to move in. I told myself I'd misfiled it. I told myself I'd already rewound over it. I told myself I was not the kind of idiot who loses a thing after a day like we'd had. The base went to sleep in layers. The motor pool coughed its last wrench into a coffee can. The mess tent shut its metal mouth. The night guards began the long arithmetic of minutes. Bugs tuned up outside the wire. The jungle answered with its 1,000 small engines. I closed my eyes, and the ridge came back anyway. Vines like curtains. Breath on my wrist, cool and wrong. The figures at the lip making a doorway out of themselves. When the dream started, it wore my boots. I was back on the river bend, except the sandbar had moved to the ceiling. The watchers stood up there, tall and patient, facing the sky the way men face a flag. The water ran over my face and made breathing a choice I kept failing to make. I reached for the handset and found it was a fish. It wriggled out of my hand and said nothing. I woke with my mouth open and no sound in it. The tent was a black box, with the lid off. I had that heavy feeling in my arms, like I'd been holding something too long. The fan kept cutting the air into quarters. The guy 2 cots over snored in the key of apology. And then I heard it. Not in the dream. In the world. A low chorus far, like a big room humming to itself. It came from the direction of the motor pool. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had a way of getting under the skin without knocking. It rose and held. A single note you could lie down on and feel your bones vibrate. It didn't come through the air, as much as through the cot, through the tent poles, through the little metal things that hold a life together when you're pretending it's all normal. "Reyes," I whispered. Before I remembered, he was not my roommate and never had been. I swallowed the mistake and teed up slow. The chorus ebbed. It came back, softer, as if it had realized it had an audience and did not prefer one. I laced my boots because men lace their boots when they don't know what else to do. I put my hand on the radio case and felt the outline of everything that was still there. The empty pocket felt like a grin I didn't care for. Outside, the compound light threw a sour bowl over gravel and trucks. The motor pool sat with its hoods down, like animals that have been fed. A guard walked a slow line along the wire, rifle easy, shoulders bored. The jungle beyond looked like it always does when it is busy ignoring you. The chorus did not repeat. The air was air again. I stood there longer than made sense, waiting for a sound that had already decided it had said its piece. On the way back in, I paused at the tent flap and listened to the other kind of music, the small domestic symphony of men asleep. A cough, a zipper, A rustle that says someone's brain has decided to try thinking again for a minute. I lay down and let my chest learn to be heavy in a good way. My hands forgot to clench. The fan sawed the air into smaller pieces until even worry couldn't use them. I slept, but not deep. The shallow kind where your body promises to wake you if anything wants you. When the morning took a run at the canvas, I already had my eyes open. The tape was still missing. The tent was still a tent. My name was still my name. The river would still be the river. I did not tell anyone about the sound, not because I was afraid they'd laugh, because I was afraid they wouldn't. Morning in camp smelled like coffee and bleach. A civilized lie, 2 strides thick. I stood at the edge of the mess tent and watched men practice being ordinary with metal trays. They did it well. This is a skill. Harlan sat with his shoulders careful, a man who knows not to bump the table when the pieces are balancing. Reyes folded himself into a chair, hat brim low enough to give his face a porch. Mac held his cup with both hands, like heat could teach him something. Duke and Sully ate like they were paying attention to the food so their eyes could be free to pay attention to the rest. I set my hat on the bench. "There is a thing my grandfather said," I began. "The way you do when a rule is older than you. You can see a house from the front and the back. But some houses have a road that passes underneath. You do not block it. If you do, whatever uses that road will make a new mouth. Maybe in your bedroom." Harlan's mouth made that small line a carpenter makes when the board is straight, but the wall is not. "We did what we could," he said. "Not defense, measurement." I nodded because it was true, and not enough. "Words are stones too," I said. "We have to place them." Reyes rubbed the heel of his hand like it hurt from holding back. "We set a charge," he said. "We pulled back. We left. We didn't stand there and count." "This is good," I said. "Counting is a kind of blocking. Staring is a kind of shouting." I looked at Mac, because honesty likes younger faces. "You felt it. That chorus. You cannot prove with your mouth what your bones heard, but you can behave as if they were right." Sully stirred powdered eggs that had chosen their form and stuck to it. "What does behaving look like?" he asked, not sarcastic, tired. "Do not shine lights into their mouths," I said. "Do not make a wall. Do not throw stones. Do not shout even with whispers. If you take something, leave something. If you must kill, go. Do not stand and look. Do not teach trouble your face." Duke lifted his cup in a little salute that did not reach his eyes. "What if they take an interest in us?" he said. "Not watching. Coming. Then you run," I said, simple because the world is sometimes simple. "Or you shoot and still run. It is not a duel. It is a misunderstanding you survive." Harlan's fork hovered and came down. "We won't be here long," he said, like a man laying a card he'd hoped to keep. "Rotation south comes tomorrow." The table listened to that. The mess tent noise kept going, but our little square went quiet the way a pond goes quiet when a shadow crosses. Tomorrow is a word that changes the taste of breakfast. Reyes blew out through his nose, a laugh that forgot its job. "So we get to move this rule to a new map." "The rule follows you," I said. "It is not tied to one cave. It is how to be small among other small things that are not you." Mac looked up like a man who has been told the weather has opinions. "Do the old people have names for them?" he asked. "Not hunting for myth. Inventory." "Many names," I said, "and let most of them stay where they lived. Night Main is the one you can carry. But the name is not important. The rule is." Harlan set his fork down and made the decision you could feel from the bench. "We'll write it," he said. "Not in a report. On each other. No lights, no walls, no stones, no counting. If we have to shoot, we go." I smiled without showing teeth. That is a good fence, I said. The kind that keeps you in the right field. A loudspeaker popped, and a voice did the daily theater of supply. Numbers for crates, numbers for mail, numbers for the time the convoy would wander out of the wire and pretend the road was only a road. Men stood up with trays, and the routine kept the world from tipping. I picked up my hat and smoothed the brim. I will tell the guides, I said, half to the tent, half to whoever listens to men who work with their hands. They will tell their sons. Some will laugh, some will nod. Enough will remember. Sully scraped the last of the eggs and gave the plate back, the way you return a borrowed thing. Tomorrow, he said, like it had bones. Tomorrow, Duke echoed, and made it a direction. We walked out into a heat that would be honest by noon. The jungle breathed the way a big animal breathes when it is full and unbothered. The river down the hill kept its appointment with gravity. Somewhere a generator coughed into a rag and then cleared its throat. Harlan looked north, up past the ridges where stone has mouths, and then south, toward whatever version of the same waited for us there. Pack it up, he said. Not loud. Enough. Rules travel light when they're true. We were up before the light decided which way to come in. River air carries its own clock. It said go. We broke camp the way men who plan to live do quiet. Neat. No pieces left for the jungle to keep as souvenirs. Engine checks, fuel, bilge. The little rituals that turn fear into torque. Fog sat low on the water like a curtain that hadn't learned its job. The bend wore it like a scarf. We pushed off anyway, because the schedule is a superstition, and I like ours. Sully settled on the gun, without making it a threat. The barrel rested like a hand on a table, where you mean to be polite. He scanned the bank with the corner of his eyes, the way you look at a dog you grew up with, that sometimes remembers wolves. Sweet and easy, I told the throttle. She answered in a voice that had slept, but not dreamed. We slid past the dead banyan. The river here has 1 lane when it feels kind, and 2 when it feels clever. Today, it wanted to be kind. The bow rode a thin V into the fog, and the fog closed it behind us, like a seamstress tired of men. Half a mile down, the world had a thought. The hush arrived in patches. Frogs paused. Insects skipped a beat, and then another. The air took on a cool undernote, even though the day was warming its hands. I know that quiet now. It's not absence. It's attendance. Sully didn't look at me when he said, "They're here." He was right. Along the opposite bank, spaced like posts on a fence built by someone who hated a crooked line, tall shapes stood inside the green. Not forward, not hunting, not hiding. Present. Arms long, heads a hair forward, listening through the chest. The light, what little the fog was letting through, slid on them in sheets that made the understory look like it was learning to be water. I kept the throttle where it was. Not more, not less. The river has opinions about men who pretend not to hear. North Ridge, I whispered on the net out of habit, then remembered we were our own ridge this morning. The handset gave me a friendly static, and then decided silence was also a kind of company. We held mid-channel. The current under the bow had a grip to it I didn't love. A little lift, a little settle, like something big turning over in a sleep it hadn't finished. The stern line woke and laid its tail in the water with an S, then straightened as if someone had written their name and thought better of it. Sully let his shoulders hang. He has a way of making big parts of himself look smaller when a room asks him to. He didn't point. He didn't count. We've learned not to. The watchers didn't lean in. They didn't raise their faces. They didn't close the distance. They did the most unnerving thing a thing can do. Nothing. They allowed us. The fog pulled back in a strip, and showed the sandbar we knew, clean as a plate on a table a second before a meal. The line where the jungle begins wore that bright, wet shoulder like a medal. No prints from here. No proof. I was grateful. We took the bend like a man stepping off a porch in the dark field for the first plank. Trust the rest. The engine made a low, even sound that says a tool is happy with your choice. Almost there, I said, which is what you say when you feel watched and decide to treat it like weather. Something touched the hull. Not hard. Not a hit. A hand on the shoulder in a crowd. The boat shifted an inch and came back. The current's grip changed tone. I kept us steady with just enough throttle to tell our story, without making it bigger. The fog exhaled. The bank slid by. The watchers reduced themselves to silhouettes and then to ideas. The way a thought gets smaller when you decide not to argue with it. Sully tapped the deck twice with a finger. A habit that means, remember this. I nodded for the same reason. We both kept our eyes where the river wanted them. We eased past the last of them, and the air warmed a notch, like someone closed a door behind us. Frog song rebooted in test pattern bursts. A heron changed its mind about a landing and took the long way around. I let out a breath that I had not admitted I was renting. The engine's hum picked up half a whisper on its own, like she'd been holding back out of respect. Home stretch, I said, and meant nothing by the word home. We made the straight away from the bend, and the boat relaxed into the ordinary rhythm men are built for. Sully set the safety without looking at it. He keeps a ritual for being allowed. I leaned to check the waterline out of habit. That's when I saw it. On the transom, just above the wake's little white lace, a fresh handprint. Wet, clean. 3 long pads splayed, each ending in a neat crescent. No smear, no wobble. Satin lifted by something that does not test a surface before it trusts it. Sully saw where I was looking. He didn't swear. He didn't pray. He reached and laid 2 fingers next to the print without touching it, measuring. His fingers looked short. We didn't speak for a long few heartbeats. The river said what rivers say when they have done you a favor and would like it to go unmentioned. I kept the throttle where it belonged. The handprint caught sunlight through the thinning fog and gleamed once before the wind took it. Then it was only a wet shape fading on metal. Then it was memory, copy that. Sully said to nothing in particular, as if someone had given us instructions and we intended to follow them. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. Engines have moods the way men do. Ours decided to forgive us. The hum settled into that narrow band that says a job and a tool agree on the terms. I set the gun where it belongs when it isn't needed. Low. Latch kissed, hands off. Not surrender. Etiquette. The river smoothed, then didn't. A seam ran under the hull, a long wrinkle, like a big fish deciding it preferred another story. The boat lifted half an inch, then dropped the same. Not chop, not eddy. Company. Feel that? I said. Duke didn't answer with words. He trimmed a hair off the throttle, the kind of adjustment you'd miss if you weren't holding your breath already. The wake straightened. The seam kept pace. It tracked us for a dozen boat lengths. Never bumping. Never gone. You can learn a thing's confidence by the way it keeps a parallel. I kept my eyes soft, the way you read a field for movement. In the green, once every few trees, a sheet of wrong light moved inside shade, like water, learning to stand. The watchers were still there, but less interested. I liked being less interesting. Come on, I told the river. Same tone you use with a horse that remembers it's bigger than you. She indulged me. The seam thinned. The hull let itself be an honest boat again. The handprint on the transom had gone to dull. I didn't turn to watch it dry. You don't stare at gifts you don't understand. The bend forgot our names. That's how you know you've left a thing. Frog chatter rebooted like a bar band after the power flickers. The engine shook off its manners and took a deep breath it had been singing. Easy, I said, because gratitude sounds like that when it's busy. We slid back into lanes that had only water in them. No seams, no hands, just gravity doing its steady work. I kept us on schedule because men sleep better when time behaves. The pier showed its splinters the way it always does. The kids who hang around for candy we don't have were elsewhere. The dog that belongs to no one pretended not to know me. We tied up, logged fuel like the world was normal, and walked the walk you walk when the ground feels welcome under your feet again. I didn't tell anyone about the print. Sully didn't either. Not because it was secret, because it wasn't mine to spend on talk. Later, after chow that did its best and coffee that didn't, a kid with a camera and a smile full of extra decided to tour the docks making art. He had a Polaroid he loved more than he loved listening. Snap, wait, wave, reveal. He handed squares to the air as if it would tip. Hey, he said, spotting us like he had just remembered our names from a party. You boys were down by the bend this morning, yeah? We were down by some water, I said, because accuracy can be kind. He grinned and found 2 fresh prints. Caught the tree line just for the texture, he said. Fog was doing a whole thing. He laid them on a coil of rope with a magician's flourish he hadn't earned. First frame. The bar, a pale tongue. The wall of green behind it. Beads of wet, catching what light there was. Second frame. Same, a heartbeat later. Sully picked up the first without touching the inked part. He's good with delicate. He squinted, then didn't. He let it be a picture. He set it down. I looked because that's what's left when you're done pretending you won't. In the tree line, not front and center off in the right third where the green thickens, there was the suggestion of a shape taller than any man you'd hire for a ladder. Not focus. Not proof. Just a place where light failed to be honest in a way I now recognize. 3 leaves in a row wore a bright shoulder at the same height. A stripe along a vine had a kink where a long arm might have passed. The picture had caught a rumor in the act of being true. The kid beamed at nothing. Looks spooky, right? He said, pleased with himself. It looks like a tree line, I said. He didn't catch the generosity and wandered off to bother someone else. Sully slid the second frame toward me with 2 fingers. Keep it, he said. For what? I asked. For when you want to doubt yourself later, he said, easy. It's cheaper than calling me. I tucked the square into the flat pocket under my dog tags. It felt like a coin that didn't spend. On the way back to the tent, the motor pool coughed a wrench into a coffee can and called it a night. The sky decided to remember stars. The jungle tuned its 1,000 little engines. The seam under the boat had peeled away. The handprint had dried. The picture stayed wet a minute more, then finished becoming whatever it was. We didn't have to pass it around to make it real. It was already doing that work on its own. The admin shack smelled like carbon paper and hot dust. A fan ticked as if it had arthritis. Forms lived in stacks that made the plywood bow. Outside, the base tried on noon and decided to keep it. I had written it clean. Unit, grid, time on, time off, weather, terrain, remarks. The remarks box was the size of a cigarette pack and wanted a smaller story than the one I had. I made the language behave anyway. No adjectives, no myth. Movements observed along riverbank and limestone ridge. Non-hostile. No engagement initiated. One demolition at Heath-Lip for force protection. Withdrawal in good order. That was the point. Put it into words the machine understood. The clerk behind the counter was a lance corporal with a haircut you could set a spirit level on. Patrol report? He said, because that is what men like us carry into rooms like this. Patrol report, I said, and slid the sheet. He read the blocks he cared about. Start. End. Casualties, negative. Contact, blank. He hesitated at remarks long enough to prove he knew how to read without proving he liked it. He reached for the stapler, took a clean sheet from a stack, and fixed my page to the blank one with a single bite of steel at the corner. Then he put the packet face down in a tray, marked filed. "Need anything else, Sergeant?" he said. His face was kind enough to make me dislike it. "Receipt," I said. He blinked and found a stamp in a drawer that had 9 of them. "Received." He hit my copy with a neat blue rectangle and signed his initials as if they mattered. They would later, if anyone cared about the neatness and not the paper. "Appreciate you," I said, "because courtesy keeps rooms upright when you feel like kicking a leg." He nodded and reached for the next thing in a queue that did not include men. On the way out, I passed the captain with the old eyes and the new boots. He looked at the tray. He looked at me. "Everything squared?" he asked, words stripped to wire. "Everything is in the box it belongs in," I said. "That's the idea," he said, and walked on with that officer's gait that tells you he knows exactly how much the floor will give. Back at the tent, I laid my copy flat under a canteen so the stamp wouldn't curl. Reyes watched without making it a conversation. Max set his radio spools in a row that left a gap where one ought to be and didn't explain it. Duke and Sully cleaned tools that hadn't needed it. Lon sat on a crate and studied the shape of his hands as if they were maps. The generator coughed and caught. Somebody shouted about mail. A helicopter sketched a hot line across the sky and went somewhere else with it. I picked the report up again and read my own careful words until they looked like someone else's. They did their job. They made a story small enough to swallow without chewing. I slid the paper into the bottom of my kit where it would live like a thin, obedient lie. Out on the wire, the jungle rehearsed the afternoon shift. The ridge where we'd stood was a piece of stone on a map no one would request. The underroad would breathe with or without my signature. The river would fold the bend into itself and forget. There are things you put in a report. There are things you put in a pocket. I had done both. It felt like losing twice. I was a woodcutter before the war, and a woodcutter after, which is a way of saying I knew how to listen to hills. In the early 90s, the valley had grown its green back over the old scars. Bomb craters became ponds where frogs held meetings. Trails forgot soldiers and remembered buffalo. Men in town started talking about tourists in bright shoes who wanted to walk where we walked and call it a new discovery. Let them talk. The limestone does not care what name you give it. I went up into the karst alone because a storm had torn the old bamboo footbridge and no one wanted to be the first idiot out after the rain. I like the quiet after weather. The mountain sweats. The trees smell like clean knives. The river tries to remember how wide it is supposed to be. The path I took was not a path until my feet decided it could be one. Ferns wrote soft sentences on my shins. The rock under the skin of soil pushed its corners into the day. You can feel limestone with your ankles, the way it turns without asking, the way it insists on making rooms out of darkness. The river I followed was a small cousin of itself, the sort of water that can disappear under a handful of stones and come up laughing 6 fields away. It vanished into a tangle of roots, then came back on the other side with a new idea about direction. I trailed it, the way you follow a child you are pretending not to chase. The smell found me first. Cool. Egg rot, old water. I have pulled dead things from culverts. This was not that. This was a throat exhaling from a place that had not finished being made. The trees stepped back without moving. That is the only way I can write it. The undergrowth made a polite shape on either side, and left a piece of rock bare as a forehead. Vines hung in a curtain that did not quite know which side of the room it was supposed to be on. The air beyond the curtain was gray even in noon. I pushed the vine with my forearm, and the draft touched the salt at my wrist. The opening was not huge. You could not throw a house into it and keep the roof. But it was larger than any door men had a right to cut without help. The edges were too neat for a fall, and too patient for a tool. It looked like a mouth that had been taught to close and still preferred open. I do not carry a watch. I carry a piece of string with knots tied in it for distance and a nose for weather. The draft said rain had already chosen another valley to bother. I had time to look and not be foolish. I whistled once because my father taught me to tell places I was coming in, not to ask permission, to avoid surprise. The sound did not echo. It folded and went somewhere that had use for it. Inside the lip the floor dropped a man's height, and then leveled, stone swept clean by whoever lives underwater. Stamps of mineral had grown in sheets along the walls, white and green, like soap left too long in a dish. A haze hung in the first room, the way breath hangs in winter. My eyes watered and then got over themselves. I do not light lamps in a place that breathes. Fire eats the wrong air and teaches you a lesson you cannot afford. I stood and let the gray be enough. The passage went left and then right, and then made a statement about distance I did not feel like arguing with. At my feet, the sand was new. Not beach sand, not quarry dust. Something in between, laid down by water that knows chores. I crouched to see what stories it had saved from the last rain. Frog. Centipede. A snake that had decided life was better in the dump. And one thing I did not have a word for. A wide set, 3 forward pads, neat crescents at the tips, the heel in absence, the spacing too long for cheeks. I did not touch them. I am not young. The draft grew cooler. The smell of egg and metal decided to be the room's idea of politeness. The hairs on my arm paid attention to something my eyes could not. I stood and took one step backward and felt clever. There are days you want to be the first man to set foot where a foot has not been. There are other days you want the place to know you are a man who will not make a wall with your body. I was having the second kind of day. At the lip, I turned to look out and saw the jungle pretending to forget me. Trees held their breath, the way children do when they think it makes them invisible. In the wet leaves at shoulder height, a line of brighter gloss ran even across the edge of green, as if something tall and certain had brushed past not long ago. I had seen that line once before, years back, lower in the valley, on a morning when a hunter said the forest had moved while he was not looking. He was not a liar. He was not a poet. He was a man with good eyes and a daughter who sold vegetables at market. I stepped into the day and let the vine fall back into place. The draft pressed the cloth of my shirt and then forgot me. The river below me made a private noise and fell into a hole I could not see. I sat on a rock that had made up its mind about sitting and took a drink from my canteen. When I stood to leave, I chose not to mark the place with cut bark or a cloth tied to a branch, the way boys do when they want to find a thing again badly enough to ruin it. I walked the way I had come until the path decided it was tired of being a path and returned to the business of being forest. At the village, the dogs were asleep in the good dirt. The boy who fixes bicycle tubes had black hands and a smile like a broken bowl. I bought chicory in a little cone and salt in a bag that breathed through its paper. I told no one exactly what I had seen. I told everyone a mountain wind had teeth up there today, and that someone should bring a rope if they wanted to be stupid tomorrow. The first tour men came a few seasons later with clipboards and boots that looked too new to trust. They made maps in pen and then in ink. They brought lanterns that ran on gas and then on batteries and then on hope. They asked if I knew a mouth where the river disappears and comes back with something to say. I smiled and took them to a different mouth first. You test people the way you test a floor. When I took the right ones to the right place, I stood to the side the way a doorman stands when he is proud of the building, but does not live in it. They said words I did not need. Karst, chamber, traverse, flowstone. Their lights made the gray too bright. The breath out of the lip frowned at their fire, and then forgave it when they lowered the mantles and minded their steps. They went in. They went far. They came back with faces washed in an old kind of fear that makes men talk softly, even when they want to sing. They said it is bigger in there than a story will hold. I believed them. I had known that from the first draft on my wrist. One of them asked what the place was called. Pen ready, map eager. I told him the name the old people use for the river that disappears into the hill and comes out of the hill again. He wrote it as if he had made it. Names weigh less in his language. That is fine. The rock does not carry weight the way paper does. At night, sometimes, when the wind finds the valley in a certain way, you can stand by the cooking fire and hear a low voice come from the slope that is not any man's throat. It is not loud. It is enough. My wife tells me that is the mountain, remembering something I said to it years ago. I tell her, the mountain does not keep a notebook. She smiles like a person who has already counted the goats and knows the number. I do not tell tourists about the line in the leaves at shoulder height. I do not show boys the wide prints in the sand at the lip when the water drops and the draft is colder. I tell them the same rule my grandfather told me. Do not block the breathing places. If you throw a stone into a throat, the throat will find a new mouth, maybe in your bedroom. They laugh sometimes. Then they do not. The good ones nod and forget the words until the day they need them. The mountain will teach them again. The mountain is patient. It has the time. I keep a garage because you can put a life in one, and people will call it storage. Shelves, coffee cans of bolts that don't belong to anything. A lawnmower that would rather be respected than repaired. Winter afternoons smell like oil that has made peace with dust. I was older, the way a man gets older when he keeps his promises and loses a few anyway. My knees had opinions, and my back had a vote. The radio lived on a hook over the workbench, retired the way a dog retires, listening even when it pretends not to. I was hunting a socket I knew I owned when I found the ammo can. Olive drab, paint scuffed down to the metal on one edge, lid that still sealed like it believed the world was wet. I knew the can. It had lived 3 houses with me and never asked for attention. Somebody had stenciled a number on it once and then moved on. I popped the latch and the smell of old time came out. Canvas, cardboard. The ghost of a jungle that hadn't asked for me in 50 years. Inside was a tangle of things I must have promised myself to sort. A dog tag chain that wasn't mine. A harmonica with one broken reed. A spool case for radio tape, the kind with the little snap that always gives up first. I picked the case out, and my thumb knew exactly where to press to open it. Muscle memory is one of the only honest historians. Empty. No spool, no acetate, just the round hollow where something had been that wanted to keep voices alive past the day they were spoken. The inside of the lid had my handwriting on a piece of old tape. I had written 2 words with a pencil that thought it was ink. Night men, lowercase, like I hadn't wanted to bother them. I sat on the stool by the bench, because that is what you do when you notice a hole has been living inside your things for decades and you only just now tripped over it. I turned the case over and looked for the obvious answer. Another compartment, a flap, a version of me who had been clever. It was honest in its emptiness. For a while I held it like a relic. Then I held it like a joke that had forgotten the punchline. Then I put it on the workbench next to the radio that had been good to me and tried to remember when I'd last had the spool that belonged in it. I could not. Memory isn't a library. It's a town where the buildings move at night. I made coffee I did not need and sat with the cup until the mug warmed my hands and nothing else. The case waited like a dog that has shown you the stick and is wondering if you still know how to throw. The computer on the far end of the bench coughed itself awake, the way old things do when they resent being asked to try. I checked messages out of the habit that keeps men from calling people they should have called already. There was one from a sender whose name looked like it had been assembled out of reputable letters. A tour operator, glossy fonts, logo with a river that remembered itself. Subject line that said, Small Group Expedition, Karst River System, Vietnam. Body text that offered slots, dates, refundable deposits, and a photograph of a mouth in a limestone hill, big enough to argue with a church. The picture wasn't where we had been. Not exactly. But the wind in the picture was the wind I knew. The edges of the lip had that too even patience. The mist in the first room was the same shade of gray my eyes think in when they don't trust the light. The copywriter had written wonder in 3 different ways, and none of them were wrong. I looked at the ammo can. I looked at the case with no tape. I looked at the radio that had more miles on it than my truck. I wrote back to the email without deciding to. Thank you for the information. I typed. Which is how you start a letter to your past when you want it, not to scare. Please send the detailed itinerary and any safety requirements. I am an older participant, in good health, with prior experience in similar terrain. I did not type the word similar twice. I hit send and listened for a low chorus that did not come. In the kitchen, the sink ticked as cool water met hot metal. Outside the garage door, the street minded its business. Somewhere a neighbor tried to teach a motorcycle a lesson about idle that it would never learn. The world had the nerve to be ordinary. I picked up the empty case again and read my own small letters. I remembered a kid with a Polaroid. I remembered a soundbar and a line of wet leaves at a height that did not belong to me. I remembered a voice that had come through stone and tuned the little bones in my ear to a note that was not mine. The inbox chimed. Fast reply. A packet. Waivers. Gear lists. A note about respecting local customs. A checkbox for no drones. Another for no flash photography inside HCI designated zones. A paragraph in bold about staying with your guide at all times and not entering side passages without explicit authorization. Someone had learned the right lessons and then written them down in the wrong language, which is to say legal. I printed the list because paper is how I admit I'm going to do a thing. I laid it next to the empty case. The 2 of them made a pair. The rule I had kept and the hole it had left. On the bottom of the ammo can, under a folded bandana that used to be red, lay a small envelope with a name in my handwriting that wasn't mine. I didn't open it. Some days you only get to do one brave thing, and today had already spent it. I put the case back in the can and left the lid unlatched. I left the email open on the screen. I left the radio where it was, because some tools keep you honest by staying heavy. I stood in the doorway and let the winter light come as far in as it wanted. The garage smelled like oil and wood, and the kind of quiet that has earned it. I said out loud to nobody, I'm going to see it in daylight. The radio did not answer. The empty case did not either. But somewhere between them, a rule I had carried since 1968 sat down next to a ticket I had not yet bought. And the 2 of them agreed not to fight. The internet at 2 in the morning is a different country. The maps load slower. The arguments are tired. The ads try a softer voice. My apartment hummed like a machine pretending to be a room. Coffee that had stopped being kind a long time ago kept my cup from being empty. I had 3 tabs that mattered, and a 4th that was only faith. On the left, a scanned set of riverine patrol logs, the kind some retired lieutenant colonel uploads when his garage starts saying rude things about space. Names blacked out with a marker that had aged into transparency. Grid coordinates typed by a clerk who respected numbers more than sleep. On the right, a bombing overlay from the same months. The circles and ovals a weather report for a war. In the middle, a satellite view of a valley that has learned to look like it never happened. I don't go down rabbit holes. I give them addresses and tell them to stand in a line. People like to think you find the one clue and angels sing. Sometimes you do. Mostly you listen for a rhythm. In the patrol logs, there was a note that didn't fit. 3 separate entries, different units, all using the same good military phrase when they didn't want to write a story. Movements observed along riverbank. No engagement. Engine trouble in beyond. The dates were a week apart. The grid squares were neighbors. Somebody was repeating the same afternoon until the paperwork was tired of acting surprised. On the bombing overlay, the circles made their own ugly constellation. Artillery had walked a pattern north of a particular ridge, then stopped like someone had slapped a hand. The gap wasn't nothing. It felt like a courtesy, or a superstition, or an accident promoted to policy. I laid the transparent layer over the map and moved it until it didn't complain. The clusters lined up with the river bend you could still see from orbit, because rivers are stubborn. 3 clusters, 1 valley. If stories were people, this is where they would meet on purpose. I zoomed until the pixels gave up, then zoomed out until the place felt like a place again. There is a point where maps stop being helpful and start being beautiful. I backed away a step. The 4th tab was a reunion forum that had not been designed, only accreted. Men who had been young at the same time and place had decided the internet could be a bar where they didn't have to raise their voice. The thread titles were both jokes and prayers. Looking for Brownwater Crew, late 67 to early 69. Anyone remember the dead banyan? Does the river still bend where it used to? Real names sometimes, sometimes not. Photographs that had bleached into flatness, then gotten scanned and made worse. The kind of spelling people do when they were taught by life and not teachers. I read for the voice a person has when he wants to tell the truth, but is trying to square that with being polite to his own ghosts. It took a while. You have to let men finish telling each other the parts that count, and sometimes that is about a dog or a can of peaches. Then the current brings what it was carrying. In a thread about engines that quit at bad moments, a user with a handle that could have been a name if you took the vowels out wrote something that made my little bones pay attention. Sandbar drift below dead banyan. Engines died twice. Weird quiet. Never figured it. He did not say spooky. He did not say story. He put the fact down and stepped back. His profile was a postcard. A state I could guess from the football team. A decade in a trade that leaves your hands proud. 2 photos. One of a boat that could have been any of 100, except for the way men stand on decks when they've earned them. And 1 Polaroid scanned crooked, edges thumbed, showing a strip of sand and a tight wall of green and nothing else, which was almost the point. I messaged him, because you don't knock on a door at 2 in the morning, even if the lights are on. I wrote the way I do too when I'm asking someone to risk a little. Plain. Specific. No bait. My name, my work, what I was looking at. I included the dates and the bend and the dead tree, and I left out the vocabulary that turns a man's memory into a circus trick. I asked if he would talk. I told him we could start with his boat and end where he wanted. I did not expect an answer. The internet at 2:00 is good for ghosts and bad for people. He pinged back in under a minute. Sure, he wrote. Name's Sully. You a crank or a real one? Real enough, I wrote. You? Not sure, he wrote, and added a smile I believed. We traded a few more lines. He did not give me his phone. He offered a diner at noon, his town. The kind of place where men have used the same sugar pourers since the 70s, and the waitress calls everyone sweetie, because that is easier than remembering names she doesn't need. Before I shut the laptop, habit took me one more round. I checked the patrol logs again and traced the route in my head, like a man touching a scar, to see if it still knows where it came from. I matched the coordinates to the curve in the river that photographs like to pretend is timeless. I took a screenshot of the overlay and saved it twice, because hard drives have ways of becoming suddenly philosophical. Then I opened a folder I keep for the parts of stories that might be evidence someday. I dragged in the Polaroid of the sand that had nothing in it. You never know what the eye will learn to see when it has other eyes to talk to. When the apartment went quiet enough to accuse me of staying awake, I closed the lid and fell there with the fan ticking. The building sighed the way old buildings sigh when the heat is doing math badly. The street below said a car had opinions and then forgot them. I thought about a rule I had heard once in a place I wasn't supposed to be. If the day offers you a way to not be a wall, take it. Reporting is a kind of wall if you're not careful. You can write the facts so tight, you block the breathing places. I wrote a list instead of sentence. Noon, diner. Ask about the engine dying and whether silence has shape. Bring the map, but not into the conversation first. Do not say nightmen. Do not say lizard. Let him choose his nouns. Ask about hands-on hulls. Ask about whether the fog felt like a curtain or a room. Ask about what they didn't tell their reports and why. The coffee had turned into a dare. I poured it down the sink and watched it make a small river that disappeared into a metal mouth and came back somewhere else, having decided to be someone's problem. Before bed, I opened one more tab because I am not a romantic and I like when my fear has numbers. The cave tour company with the glossy fonts had a safety page so thorough it apologized for existing. No drones, no flash in restricted zones. Stay with your guide. Do not enter side passages. The words were legal, but the shape was a rule older than paper. I thought about buying a ticket. Then I thought about not showing up at noon in that diner if I did. Then I closed the computer, because it is possible to borrow trouble on a credit plan with a low rate and never notice you are paying. Sleep came like a sales pitch. I did not say yes. I woke at 8 anyway, and believed the day when it said it had plans for me. At 10, I printed the map and folded it the way old men do to fit a pocket. At 11, I left my apartment with a notebook that does not apologize for being paper. At 11:50, I slid into a booth that had been recovered twice since the 80s and put my hands on the menu like I was holding still. At noon, a man with a body that had done work and a face that did not need an apology stood by the door and looked around the room the way men do when they are deciding whether to sit with their past. He saw me because I had not tried to hide. He came over and did not offer his hand. He sat. He nodded at the coffee and said, "You June?" "I'm June," I said. "You're Sully." "That's what they call me," he said. He looked at the menu and then didn't. "You can start. But don't make it a ghost story unless you bring the ghost." "I won't," I said. "Good," he said, and smiled like someone who had decided the day might be fair after all. Diners are churches for people who don't like sermons, coffee, bacon, a bell that thinks it's a choir. I slid into the booth and let the vinyl remember other men. June had a notebook that didn't apologize for being paper. She said hello, like someone who keeps her promises. We did small talk in 2 lines, and then let it be big. She asked the right way: ground first, sky later. Where, when, which bend? How many times the engine died, and whether silence has a shape. I liked the questions. They didn't come hunting my adjectives. It wasn't a shutdown, I said. It was a decision. Twice in 1 week. Same bend. Dead banyan for a landmark. You can smell the metal in the air before it happens, if you know what you're smelling for. She wrote that, like she'd heard men try and file to say the same thing, without making it sentimental. Anything touch the hull? She asked. A couple of times, I said. Polite, like a neighbor with opinions about your fence. The waitress called me sweetie, without meaning anything by it, and put down coffee that tasted like a good habit. June waited until she moved on, before she brought up the picture. You posted a scan, she said. Tree line, fog. You mind if I see the original? I took the Polaroid out of the flat pocket under my tags. The edges had been thumbed into honesty. I slid it across the table like a bill I could afford to pay. She looked, and didn't lean on it. She let her eyes do the work. Right third, where the green gets serious light failing in a way it shouldn't. A suggestion of height you measure with your neck, a wet stripe shoulder high to someone built longer than a man. She didn't point. She didn't zoom in with her phone. She gave the picture the dignity of being a piece of paper. May I? She asked. Go ahead, I said. She took her phone out anyway, and made a careful shot, square on. No glare. Like a person who has ruined enough evidence to learn. Then she slid the print back, with the same respect I'd used to hand it over. I brought you something, she said, and set her phone face down between us, like a coin. She tapped play on an audio file. Not loud. Enough. Air moving through a place that had opinions. A steady, low note. Not wind in trees. Not water in a culvert. It had weight to it. It found the little bones in my ear and tuned them like a fork. Field recording, she said. Outside a limestone mouth. Clear day. Guide made me stand with my light off and my mouth shut. Says tourists don't hear it until they stop trying to see. I put my hand on the formica. The sound came up through it, same way it used to through the hull and the ribs and the part of your back that decides when to be old. I felt the diner go quiet around the edges of the world, even though the bell over the kitchen door still believed in lunch. That's close, I said. Not the same place. Same rule. She nodded like she already had that word in her pocket. Rules travel, she said. We let the sound play out and didn't fill the space it left. The waitress refilled both cups and pretended she could not hear anything but coffee being coffee. You ever see one? June asked last, because she knew it was a last kind of question. I did, I said. Out on the sand, walking like a man who knows where he put his feet. Didn't look at us. Didn't nod. Skin caught light wrong, arms long, head a little forward. If I put a sight on it, my hands remembered how to shoot. My head remembered a line I'd drawn for myself and didn't cross. She wrote that down and then stopped writing, because sometimes you don't make a man listen to his own words twice. You going back? She asked. Not to fight, I said. Why? Maybe to look at daylight on the same ground, with a guide who knows how to scold me. She smiled with half her mouth, the side that trusts the other half to keep secrets. I've got a line on someone local, she said. Name's Lon. He has rules he intends to keep. He might be willing to let 2 old men and 1 reporter stand within earshot of them. Earshot is enough, I said. We paid like decent people and walked out into noon. The light over the diner door blinked the way it has for a decade and a half. Trucks made truck noises. The world did its trick, where it pretends it isn't strange. At my truck, June tucked her notebook into a bag the size of a stubborn truth. "I'll send you the map overlays," she said. "And the recording. Send me your questions instead," I said. "The ones you didn't ask today." She nodded. "I've got a few," she said. "So do I said, and felt the weight of the Polaroid find its place again against my chest. Driving home, I played the recording once more through the truck's bad speakers. The diner smell left my calls. The note stayed. I rolled down the window and let the air in. It came with the clean knife smell you get after rain, even though the sky was busy being blue. I didn't think ghost. I didn't think monster. I thought road you don't block. I thought under road you leave clear. At a light, a kid in a ball cap looked over and tried to figure out why an old man was smiling alone in a truck. I let him wonder. Some rules you learn the long way. The living room had been arranged to reassure furniture. Chair where a chair belongs. Table that knew its corners. On the wall, a shadow box with the polite shine of glass ribbons straight. Metals pinned in a way that made them believe. The air smelled like lemon oil, and the kind of quiet that accumulates when a house keeps its promise. June sat on the edge of the couch with a notebook that didn't make a sound. She watched without leaning. Mac and Sully had taken chairs that faced the same direction, out of old habit. Lon stood by the window with his hat in his hands, as if the light had asked him to hold it a minute. I poured water because pouring is a useful stall. The ice clicked against the glass like small decisions being counted. "They sent the letter when you came home," June said, gentle as a level placed on a mantle. "What did it say?" "That the country appreciated my service," I said. I kept the envelope. "The letter didn't travel as well." She nodded. "Not a trap. An invitation." I looked at the shadow box because that's where I've kept certain truths, behind reflection, under glass. A purple ribbon that had nothing to do with courage, only with luck. A good conduct medal that meant I could read a calendar. A ribbon bar arranged like a little flag trying to remember its lines. I set the glass down and let my hands be old in my lap. "We sealed a home," I said. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the right size for the room. Lon closed his eyes once, the way a man does at the end of a prayer. "It felt like protection," I went on. "We had men to bring back. We had orders that were built for problems with names. A mouth that breathes is not a problem with a name." June's pencil waited. It did not hurry me. I told myself a story that fit in the remarks box, I said. Force protection. Demolition at cave lip. Withdrawal in good order. I smiled without teeth. "The world shrinks nice under a stapler." "And after?" she asked. "What did you tell yourself then?" "That the ridge would forget us if we forgot it first," I said. "That rivers and under roads don't carry grudges. That if anything lived behind that breath, it would make other choices once the noise stopped." I took a breath of my own and found it shallow. Most of that was a lie, not a wicked one. Just the kind men use to keep from waking their houses. Sully looked at the shadow box, like it might move. "You did what I would have done with what we had," he said. "That's the trouble," I said. "We had the wrong kind of tool and the right kind of fear. You can get a lot of harm out of that combination without ever raising your voice." Mac turned the empty tape case over in his hands, the little hinge clicking like a metronome for regret. "You thinking about going back?" he asked, though he already knew the answer he wanted me to give. "I'm thinking about standing where I stood and not making a wall out of myself this time," I said. "I'm thinking about saying the quiet part out loud, where the rock can hear it." Lon opened his eyes and let the room borrow his calm. "You bring your hands open," he said. "You keep the rule. No stones, no counting, no shouting." "I can manage that," I said safely. I've shouted enough for one life. June slid a folded paper from her notebook, a photocopy of a map, with an X that was not official ink. She set it on the coffee table like a confession, and angled it so the room could read. "This look right?" she asked. I leaned over and felt my knees narrate the motion. The valley lined, the bend. The limestone rib that taught me geology with a sermon I didn't want. I touched the X with one knuckle and felt the old compass in my chest go still. "Close," I said, and made a small correction with a pencil. "The breath runs truer here." We sat with that. The afternoon came through the blinds in polite bars. Dust turned patient in the light. "I carried the charge because I knew how," I said. "I'd like to carry the rule now, because it's better." I looked at Lon. "If you'll let us borrow it, and bring it back, nicer than we found it." He smiled the way a man does when a student recites an old lesson without showing off. "Rules do not belong to anyone," he said. "They belong to the space between people. Bring yourselves. Leave the rest." June closed the notebook. Not the interview ending, something else beginning. "I'll arrange the permits," she said. "No drones, no flash. We go with a local crew. We follow the line or we turn back. Non-negotiable." "Copy that," Sully said, and it sounded like a promise kept to his younger self. I stood to see if my legs still remembered the geography of standing. They did, in their way. I went to the shadow box and lifted it off the wall, slow as a man disarming his own house. The glass caught the window and threw a pale rectangle across the room. I set the box face down on the table and opened the back. The metals smelled like old brace and careful cloth. I took one ribbon out, not the one for being shot, not the one for being good, but the plain campaign bar that says you were somewhere when somewhere was a verb. I set it aside. Then I closed the box and put it back where it had hung. "Souvenir?" June asked, surprised. "Marker," I said. "To remind me I don't owe the past any more tidy lies." I slipped the bar into my pocket. It made a small, honest weight. We stood in the doorway the way men do when leaving. Feels like a decision worth rehearsing. The street said ordinary things to passing tires. A leaf skittered across the walk and decided to be still. "Tomorrow?" Max said. "Tomorrow," I said. "We'll go see if the ridge will let us apologize without turning it into a speech." Lon settled his hat. "We will not bluck," he said. "We will not bluck," I echoed, and felt the house may house, agree to let me come back to it afterward. Rules are easier to keep when you write them down where people can see. At the trailhead, I nailed a board to a post that used to hold a sign about tickets. I painted with a stiff brush and a steady hand. No lights into side passages. No stones thrown. No shouting. Even whispers. Stay with your guide. If you take something, leave something. If you must go, go softly away. Tourists read rules like poems they don't understand yet. They nodded and took pictures of the board. They asked where the bathrooms were and whether the bats bite. I smiled the way a man smiles when he is paid to like questions. Mac arrived with Sully and Harlan and Mai in a rented truck that had opinions about hills. They looked like people trying not to look like themselves. Harlan stood a little straighter when he saw me, and then let his shoulders be their age. Mac carried a day pack with a radio in it, even though it had nowhere to talk to but his own memory. Sully wore his hands easy. June had a notebook and a permit with 4 signatures and a rule in each line. "You remember your fence?" I asked. "We do," Harlan said. "No lights into mouths, no walls, no stones, no counting." "And if we must shoot," Mac added, because his bones like full sentences. "You go," I said. "You do not teach trouble your face." We walked the first mile where the path pretends to be a path for people who like paths. Then we left it for the goat line, that keeps our calves honest. The jungle arranged light into rooms and halls. We took the halls. A breeze came down from nowhere, with egg and metal on its breath. My grandmother would have spit and touched wood. I touched the brim of my hat. At the first mouth I stopped the group and let them listen to the quiet do its work on their city ears. The entrance was a polite oval, big enough to let a truck imagine it had a chance. Mist hung in the first chamber like folded cloth. The breath out of the dark cooled the sweat on the backs of our necks. No bats, no hiss, just that low body note that finds bones and tells them the floor has more to it. No lights, I said, tapping my lamp down to a star. Hands on the wall if you must. Feet careful. We stand where the rock says stand. We do not stand in the doorway and count. They nodded. The good kind. Not for me. For themselves. Inside, the echo taught our voices manners. We moved in a line with quiet between each person, large enough to fit a mistake. The big chamber gave us its polite astonishment, ceiling like a sky with a thought. Flowstone draped the way a waterfall remembers being polite. Tourists make noises here. My group did not. I led them along the main passage until the seed branch I had not planned to show them arrived the way a friend arrives, who knows your home better than you do. Its mouth was not much an even cut in the rock. Edges too patient, just wrong enough to feel intended. The draft from it was cool and slow, like an animal breathing in its sleep and trying not to wake itself. Harlan lifted his palm into the breath and looked at me. I shook my head. Not no, just wait. I took a folded paper from my chest pocket and set it against the wall under my lamp. His pencil mark from years ago was a small X, like a careful apology. I pointed to the side passage. Here, I said. He closed his eyes once, then opened them and lived in both rooms, the one we stood in and the one behind his forehead. That's the line, he said. The breath runs truer. June didn't raise her light. She wrote a line that made no sound. Mac just stood and let his shoulders drop a little, as if a piece of weight had agreed to ride in the cart instead of on his back. Sully breathed in and then out like a man who had been holding his breath since a river decided to teach him politeness. We do not go in, I said. We say our piece from here. Harlan nodded. He took off his cap. He put his palms open at his sides, not up, not pleading. We won't block you again, he said, to the space, to the breath, to the rule. No speech. A sentence folded small enough to carry. The draft touched us, cooler for a moment, then settled back into its regular work. In the mist just inside, something shifted the way fog shifts when a hand waves under it. Not proof, not show. A courtesy. Mac whispered, "Thank you." Because some men are built to close doors gently. We stood long enough to feel like we were not stealing a moment, and not so long that the moment had to take itself back. I tapped the wall twice with the pad of my finger, a sound only rock appreciates. We go, I said. On the way out, the big chamber widened into its own light. I let them look. Not long. Enough. The drip of water found a deep pan and made a slow, patient metronome. June holstered her pen and kept her lamp down. Harlan stepped around the place where a tourist had once left a coin, and the cave had not yet decided what to do with it. He did not touch it. Sully did not either. Mac's hand trailed the air an inch from the wall, without loving the stone too hard. Outside, the jungle had decided to be honest again. Heat came back and sat on our shoulders. The path became a path for people. The sign at the trailhead waited with its rules like a fence that remembers when it was a hedge. At the truck, June looked at me. Side passage, she said softly. You didn't show the last group. The last group came to see a ceiling shaped like a dragon. I said. You came to stand where men once blocked a road. That is a different tour. Harlan shook my hand the way men do, when the other hand is holding a thing you can't set down. We'll sleep better, he said. Sleep is what rules by, I said. Not proof. Mac looked back up the slope, then at the board I'd painted. He smiled without showing teeth. You forgot one, he said. I raised an eyebrow. He pointed to the bottom corner. Do not count, he said. You said it out loud. Write it. He was right. I found the brush and the small can of paint and added 3 words in the cleanest hand I own. Do not count. By evening, a breeze came down out of the ridge and found the village the way it does when the mountain has chosen kindness. The cooking fires stood up straighter. A dog decided to nap, where the shade made good promise. The river made a noise I could not write down. Rules travel light when they're true. They come home without you having to call them. A model is a story that agrees to wear numbers. I spread mine across the table like a deck I intended to count. On the left, declassified seismic traces from the late 1960s, fat pencil lines a geologist had coaxed into digital. In the middle, an index of artillery missions by day and hour. Blast yield in pounds, positions in grids that only pretend to be straight. On the right, field journals and village notes. I'd begged and borrowed, frog counts, hunting luck. Nights the jungle went weird quiet. The kind of data scientists discount until they need it. I synced the clocks. That's always the fight. Time zones, bad handwriting, radios that drift. I let the software chew, and then did it by hand because I trust hands. Spikes from guns and airbursts built their sawtooth skyline. Hours later, ripple signatures arrived below them, like thunder remembering it is not lightning's servant. Underneath that, in the village notes, Little Valley's nights, when sound fell out of the world and did not climb back for a while. I layered the 3 and sat back. The pattern wasn't neat enough to brag about. It was honest enough to matter. Heavy concussions arrived. A day or 2 later, the valley choked on quiet bugs, flies, even the river's edge whisper. All off like someone had found the switch. Then, as the ground calmed, the sound came back, but not always the same. Hypothesis I wrote, and underlined it, because I like to see where I'm guessing. A subterranean species? Call it. What you like lives in karst voids that behave like lungs. It prefers dark, cool, and regular. Concussive waves travel the rock and water. Wake it. Move it along its underroad. When the shock passes, the valley holds its breath. Above-ground animals respond the way prey does when a big thing changes rooms. What wakes them? Artillery, bombs, sometimes large collapses in the cave system itself. What quiets the surface? Anticipation, attention, or a rule older than language. What returns the ordinary? Time, and not being blocked. I printed 3 plots because typer resists seduction. Week by week, the correlations made an argument a court wouldn't take, and a guide would understand. I wrote a second note to myself in the margin. Evidence is a wall if you stack it wrong. Build a fence instead. I called a karst seismologist I trust enough to disappoint. I gave him the clean version. He did not laugh. Concussive energy will propagate preferentially along saturated fracture networks, he said, which is science for underroads. Your lag could be diffusion time, could be behavioral. You don't have enough stations for a real inversion. I have frogs and men with good ears, I said. Sometimes that is better, he said, and told me which equations not to insult by using. I sent the overlays to Sully and Mac with a note. Not proof, a map. Mac wrote back 10 minutes later, fast for a man who prefers wrenches to keyboards. He said the word thunder twice and then said he was ready to be wrong in person. Sully replied with a picture of his truck, pointed at morning. For Lant, I printed the simplest figure 3 lines labeled boom, quiet, breathe, and taped it to a piece of cardboard. "I can teach this," he texted back. "Even to people who do not like lines." Afternoon slid into the hour when rooms turn gold, if they have windows facing the right way. I laid the plots on the floor and sat cross-legged like a kid with a train set. I moved little sticky flags where the model said nights would have gone still. I matched them against Harlan's dates, the river logs, the entries that said engine trouble in Bend, and nothing else. The flags lined up often enough to make my skin do the thing it does when old fear recognizes new language. I wrote one more line under hypothesis. If you stop shaking the house, the sleepers stop walking. If you block a door, they find another. I built a slide deck and then deleted it because we aren't that kind of expedition. I packed the cardboard, 2 pencils, a notebook that forgives crossings out, and the audio recorder with fresh batteries. On the last page of the notebook, I copied the trailhead rules in my own hand. No lights into side passages, no stones, no shouting. Do not count, and added a 5th that science sometimes forgets. If the place says enough, that is data safe ways. When the sun was down and the city put on its noise, I set the recorder on the sill and listened to ordinary night. Traffic. A radio 3 floors over negotiating a love song. A dove that thinks it owns the block. I pictured the valley holding its breath on those old nights, waiting for the concussions to pass, waiting for the underroad to quiet, waiting for the surface to remember how to be itself. Models are for building courage you can spend later. In the morning, we'd go back to where the numbers pretended to be a map and test them against a rule you feel in your bones. I closed the notebook, said the rule out loud to the room so it would travel with me, and let sleep try its experiment. Airplane aisles make old men practice humility. Knees, bag, apology, repeat. Sully and I did the shuffle with the grace 2 barn doors might have if they learned manners. The cabin smelled like coffee that had flown before, and a lemon someone sprayed to convince air it was clean. We hadn't seen each other in years that count as more than years. He looked like a man whose hands still trusted torque. I probably looked like a man who keeps a garage, so he'll have somewhere to put his ghosts. We didn't hug. We nodded, then let the nod stand for the things it had to. "Daylight this time," Sully said, as we found our row. "Daylight," I said. No bravado. He tucked the Polaroid into the book. He wasn't going to read. I put my empty tape case in the seat pocket, because I have learned to stop pretending I don't carry it. The plane found the sky and leveled where it could breathe without trying. I watched the wing write a straight line on nothing, and thought about rules you can only keep if you choose them, before you need them. No lights into mouths, no walls, no stones. Do not count. If you must shoot, go. A flight attendant asked if we were headed home or away. We both said neither, and let her pick the smile she could use on both. We didn't talk much. That is the mercy of men who have heard each other's silence before. When we did, it was inventory. Boots that won't slip. Lamps with knobs that won't beg to be turned up. Batteries. Water. A notebook. Because paper is a better witness than pride. "June's meeting us in town," Sully said. "She's got permits and a piece of cardboard with 3 lines on it." "Boom, quiet, breathe," I said. He grinned. "You woke up smart." We landed in heat that had opinions and a light that made every leaf a knife. The airport had learned to be modern without forgetting its patience. June waved from a patch of shade that knew how to hold itself. She looked like sleep had tried and failed to argue with her. "Lon is ready," she said, "which is how you tell a day it has already started without you. He has rules he expects us to remember." "Good," Sully said. We were afraid nobody would scold us. The truck we rented had a gearbox that liked second and tolerated the rest. We climbed out of town into a green that had rebuilt itself from the inside. Villages watched us pass the way villages do when they've seen every kind of stranger and still keep a chair out. Laundry hung in bright lines like flags that didn't need a war. Kids ran alongside for half a field and then remembered a ball. Lon met us at the trailhead, where his sign stood like a short sermon. He wore the same hat, the same calm, maybe 2 more lines at the corners of his eyes. He shook our hands one by one, as if our palms could keep rules better than our mouths. "You brought light you can make small," he said. "We did," June said, lifting a lamp like a student showing work. "You brought feet that will go where I point," he said. "We did," Sully said, and didn't look at me to see if I'd argue. "You brought your old noise and left it in town," he said. "I tried," I said, honest enough to let the day correct me if it wanted. He tapped the sign with one knuckle. "No lights. Into side passages. No stones. No shouting. Do not count. Stay with your guide. Words are the fence," he said. "Feet are the gate. We go only as far as the rule can come back with us." The path remembered how to be a path and then forgot on purpose. Shade made rooms. Sun made hallways. The breath from somewhere above found us on a switchback and cooled the argument my knees were about to start. Egg and old water. Metal, like a spoon left too long in the pot. We stopped where the jungle steps back without moving. Lon let the quiet do what quiet does to city ears. We didn't fill it. The rule has a tone. If you talk over it, it leaves. At a rest rock that had been a rest rock for longer than men have been men, Sully sat and took the Polaroid out. He set it on his knee and didn't look at it, which is a better kind of looking. I took the tape case out and set it beside his picture. June added the cardboard with the 3 lines and a pencil pinched under the edge so the wind wouldn't edit for her. We looked like a strange altar paper. Plastic, rule, memory. Lon nodded at the arrangement, as if someone had placed stones right for once. "We're not here to win anything," June said soft. "We're here to stand where we once made a wall and not make one." "Copy," I said, and felt the word sit better now that it belonged to something larger than a radio check. The side trail toward the limestone rib felt familiar in a way that didn't require memory to be perfect. The river below rehearsed a phrase it liked and promised to repeat it later. A dog made up its mind about us and decided to be bored. At the mouth, Lon put his hand into the draft and then pulled it back the way you test bathwater for a child. "They are home," he said. Not warning. Weather. We did not step into the lip. We did not raise our lights. We stood where the rule says stand and let the place tell us if standing was arrogant. The breath moved across our faces and wrote on our skin in a language we remembered in our bones. "Daylight," Sully said, just above a whisper. "Daylight," I agreed, and felt the old part of me 19. Mud on his elbows, radio whispering nonsense. These don't sit down in the shade and keep quiet for once. We didn't stay long. Enough to say the sentence we'd carried over Watara in years. Enough to feel the draft change for a moment, the way a room changes when someone accepts an apology. When we turned back, Lon led and we followed, feet where he put them. On the ridge the wind found us and gave us the clean knife smell that comes after rain even when there hasn't been any. Down below, the path widened for tourists who like paths. The sign waited with its fence. At the truck, June looked at us to see what the day had taken and what it had left. Sully slid the Polaroid back under his tags. I set the empty case in the glove box without closing it. The lid stayed up, as if it had opinions about air. "What do we do tonight?" I asked. "Sleep," Lon said. "If you can. If you cannot, do not try to teach sleep anything. It learns slow. Tomorrow, Sully said. We walk farther, June said. But only if the place doesn't say enough. Enough is data, I said, and the rule agreed. The path to the mouth felt shorter the second day. Nerves measured distance badly the first time. Harlan moved like a man who had negotiated terms with his knees overnight. Mac carried the radio pack, light for what it was, heavy for what it meant. Sully had the Polaroid in his chest pocket, like a saint he didn't pray to, only carried. I had the cardboard with 3 lines and a pencil that had learned not to roll. Lon set the pace the way good guides do, just slow enough to keep breath useful. Just fast enough to get past the places where bad ideas like to pitch camp. The jungle arranged itself into rooms again. Light through leaves made tidy rectangles on the ground. Limestone ribs showed their white, along the slope like bones keeping promises. Halfway up, the air changed. A cross breeze found us from 2 directions at once. Downslope warm and lacy-slacy. Upslope cool and purposeful. The 2 braiding around our wrists and under our collars. The smell came on the cool thread. Egg, old water. The faint metal of a spoon someone forgot in a pot. Harlan lifted his palm into it and let the draft right across his skin. He nodded, a man recognizing a signature. At the lip, the world had been prepared to receive us. Mist at the threshold, hung like folded linen. The stone wore a sheen you only get where water thinks slowly. The main chamber beyond the mouth made the polite astonishment it had made yesterday. Ceiling like a sky with intentions, flowstone like someone had taken a long time teaching gravity manners. We stood where the rule says stand. No lights up, no feet over the line. The breath out of the dark touched our faces, cool as a hand that knows when not to press. Lon let the quiet do its work on our city habits. He set his lamp to a star and kept it pointing at the floor. We followed suit. Main passage and back, he said. Just enough voice to keep the air honest. We do not stand in doorways. We do not count. We moved in. On the right-hand wall, fingertips a whisper from stone, lamps down to keep shadows from getting ideas. The floor sloped and then steadied, slick places announcing themselves to boots that had promised to be good. Our echoes learned to speak softly. A drop hit water somewhere, with the patience of a clock that refuses to be rushed. The side passage arrived without fanfare. Yesterday, it had been a mouth in the corner of a room. Today, it was a decision someone else had made first. Its edges were too even for chance, too patient for tool. A smooth vertical stood on the left side, no fracture, no ledge, like a cut line that had been polished by the idea of use. The draft from it was steady, regular inhale. Exhale, lungs of a sleeping buffalo, Aslan would say, except awake enough to remember guests. We did not go in. We did not shine. Harlan took off his cap and held it against his thigh. He did not make a speech. He put the word we had brought into the air, the way a man hangs a coat where it belongs. We won't block, he said. The mist moved a fraction, a courtesy you would miss if you wanted proof. Sully touched the brim of his own hat and let his eyes be wide without getting greedy. Mac's shoulders let down another inch. I felt the recorder warm in my pocket and didn't take it out. Enough is data. We followed Lon into the main passage a few dozen paces more, where the ceiling lowered and the walls narrowed, the stone making a hallway for people who remembered how to be small. The floor cut across an old deposit, like a slice through cake layers of mineral and time. Each line a season of wet and knot. I could have stayed and read it like a book. The air advised against it. Lon raised his hand. We stopped. His palm said listen, and his head said not to him. To the cave. Footfalls. Not boots. Not sandals. Not paws. Deliberate weight placed and lifted on stone. The rhythm built for a body taller than ours, slower than ours, more certain. Farther in than any lamp, we would ever be allowed to raise. The sound rounded a corner made for it and came as a folded note. One step, breath, another. Not hurrying, not hiding, present. My chest recognized it before my ears agreed. Mac's hand settled on the radio case without touching it. Harlan's open palm went lower, no walls, no gestures with edges. Sully did the strangest thing I have ever seen a gunner do. He rested his hand on the nearest rock, as if to ground himself somewhere older than his training. The chorus did not join. The footfalls were not a show. They were a schedule we had stumbled into. They came on for 10 counts, maybe 15, then paused. In the pause, a whisper of stone on stony from somewhere else, a slip or a lift, like a shoulder brushing a smoother surface. We were furniture. We were good furniture. We made ourselves small against the right-hand wall and left the center of the passage for the traffic that owned it. No one tried to count to make a number mean safety. Lan's rule had already been written on our bones. A pressure moved past without touching, the way a big body owns air in a narrow place. Not a draft, a presence. My eyes did the ugly mammal thing, where they try to make out edges in gray that will not cooperate. Nothing. Only space deciding briefly to have a shape. The breath of the cave changed a half note lower, then regained itself. The footfalls resumed, receding now, the rhythm a metronome for patience. Somewhere behind you or above us, or beneath, another set answered at a distance that was not a distance my ears had learned to measure. A conversation without words, carried by the floor. Harlan closed his eyes once and opened them the same way. He had learned something and decided to keep it small. Mac's hand left the radio and found the wall. He might as well have put his palm on a sleeping animal. We did not follow the sound. We did not speed our exit. We let the quiet put the furniture back where it went. Lan gave the tiniest nod a man can give and have it be a command. We walked back by the same line, lamps down, feet precise, the way you leave a room that has permitted you to be in it without insisting you belonged. At the lip, the light outside felt pale and blunt after stoned. The cross breeze caught up to us and traded the cave's cool for the slope's heat. Trees framed the opening like a picture that keeps forgetting what it shows. We stood just long enough for our eyes to forgive the day. Sully took the Polaroid out and glanced at it, like a man checking a list he has already memorized. He slid it away and did not give it any extra meaning to carry. Mac looked at his empty tape case and shut the hinge with his thumb. It made a small click that didn't argue with anything. Side passage is cleaner than last time, Harlan said. Half to lawn, half to the rock. Edge feels more used. Under road busy, Lan said. Rain 2 weeks ago. Lot of tourists. The ground changes even when we buy. What about us? I asked. Do we change anything just by standing here? Yes, Lan said, gentle. But not wrong. If we leave the space we take. We left it. Down the slope, the jungle put its rooms away and turned into paths and shade again. The wind coming up valley carried cooking smoke and the sugar note of rice wine. A dog lifted a head, decided we were not news, and slept harder. Somewhere far down river, a boat engine coughed and then remembered its job. At the trailhead, the sign waited with its short sermon. Children in new hats read the rules like poems and asked about dragons anyway. June added a pencil dot next to do not count, then erased it, then smiled at her own joke and left the wood alone. I pinned my cardboard to the post with a thumbtack. 3 lines marked boom. Quiet. Breathe. It looked tidy next to no drones and keep to the path. It did not look out of place. Harlan wiped his palms on his pants, like the cave had left something on them he did not mind keeping. Tomorrow we don't go deeper, he said. We just go back and stand at the edge. Edge is a place, Lon said. People forget that. In the late light, swifts stitched the air over the valley with thread you couldn't see. The ridge lay along the horizon, like a sleeping thing that had more rooms inside than any map could hold. Rules travel light when they're true. We had carried ours in and carried them out, and the place had met us halfway. Lon had us kill our lamps one by one, like a rehearsal for courtesy. Mine went last. The dark didn't fall. It arrived and took a seat. Air cooled at the cheeks and wrists. The cave's breath made a low road through us. Hands on the wall if you want, Lon said, voice shaped for stone. We stand and let the room be itself. We had moved just far enough to feel the river under the mountain. The chamber, with the buried stream that takes light and turns it into rumor. The floor sloped to the water and then forgot being floor. No sound of current, just the hush you get when a deep pool decides to keep secrets. With the headlamps off, the first sounds came back to life. A slow drip. Another. Spaced wrong for a clock and right for patience. My breathing got louder in my own head, then learned how to be small. Mac's radio case creaked once like old leather agreeing to keep still. Sully shifted weight and found a stance that belonged to him when he wasn't a gunner. Harlan was a quiet on purpose. The draft lifted the fine hair along my forearms and wrote a note there. Egg. Old water. Stone with memory. The air had a shape. Then footfalls. Far off, not our hallway from yesterday, but down by the river path under our feet. Not a splash. Steps placed on straight. Deliberate. Taller rhythm than the one our bodies keep. Slow as someone who never doubts the floor. 3, a pause. 2, a longer span. Not quite a pattern. Exactly the kind of almost pattern that makes animals listen with their spines. A presence took the edges of the chamber and softened them. Not closer. Simply here. My eyes did what eyes do in perfect dark. They manufactured outlines, discarded them, tried again. I let them stop. The cave is better, without the human insistence to draw. Across the pool, where the last breath of our lamps used to surrender, a height arranged itself out of black. Not glow, not shine, an absence that had edges. Taller than men. Arms long. The small frisson of wrong reflection, even with no light to borrow. Like a shimmer the mind adds when it recognizes a rule it didn't write. Paid a touch forward, listening with the face. Lon's palm hovered at his hip, low. No wall, the gesture said without saying. Harlan's cap stayed in his hand. Mac's thumb had drifted to the tape case in his pocket, a habit without hope, and then away again. Sully put 2 fingers on the rock, as if to ground himself to something that didn't need ground. The chorus rose. Not a song. A single held tone, as if the room were a throat that had chosen to be generous. It was not loud. It was everywhere. It found the little bones inside the ear and tuned them like forks. It pressed on the chest with a weight that wasn't pressure so much as recognition. I felt my heartbeat slip into time with it, and then decide to be stubborn and keep its own. The shape across the water did not move. It did not need to. Motion belonged to us. I thought of my cardboard with the 3 lines. Boom, quiet, breathe. We were on the last one, and the model knew nothing about how it felt. The tone drifted a half note lower, and the pool's surface murmured without making a sound, the way a cat purrs under your hand. Farther back in the dark, a second presence answered not with a voice, but with footfalls that learned from the first and replied with patience. Enough is data. I heard myself whisper, not for any recorder, for my own stubborn brain. Lon breathed the smallest assent. Do not count, he said, air thin. We didn't. We let seconds be whatever size the cave wanted them. The tone held, softened, resolved into quiet, that wasn't absence. The presence across the water receded the way tide does when you aren't looking. There, then not, without insult. The breath at our cheeks warmed a fraction, as if someone had closed a door in another part of a house. We stood longer than tourists do, and shorter than thieves. Then Lon touched Harlan's sleeve and tilted 2 fingers toward the way out. No rush, no backward glances that turn respect into theater. Feet sure, lamps still off, hands on rock when they wanted to belong to something older. At the lip, we let the world back in 1 notch at a time. First the gray made by daylight, when it has to come through stone. Then the green outside, arranging itself into honest leaves. Then our lamps, brought up to a civility that wouldn't embarrass us. Sully let his palm show a little shake and did not apologize. Mac wiped his eyes and said it was dust, which it was and wasn't. Harlan stood at the threshold and made his shoulders square, not to be big, but to belong to himself again. Lon put 2 fingertips against the jam of rock, the way a man greets a door he respects. We didn't take a photo. We didn't record the tone. We stood with it until it faded and took our measure with it into daylight. Outside, rain threatened the ridge without making promises. The valley carried cooking smoke and river talk. Children in new hats asked if the cave had dragons. No, Lon said, with a smile they could keep. Only rooms that remember you if you are kind. I added a pencil dot to my cardboard line for breathe, and then rubbed it off. The moment didn't need a mark. It had already written itself where we would keep it. Edge is a place. You forget that until a place reminds you. We came back a last time, because leaving without standing where we'd once made the worst version of ourselves felt like skipping a step in a repair. Lon led us to the side passage and stopped us a pace earlier than before. The draft out of that cut line was steady as a sleeping animal's shoulder. Egg-old water. The spoon metal I'll never be able to unmine. No lights up, no feet over, hands open. We had learned the posture without making it costume. Harlan took his cap off and let it hang by 2 fingers. Sully eased his palm to the wall, like he'd found an old friend he didn't need to talk to. June stayed half a step back with her cardboard folded under one arm, the way you carry a flag you don't need today. Lon stood where a guide stands when he is making sure the room stays a room. I reached into the radio pocket and found the empty case. The hinge clicked the way memory clicks when it bees, then tried to. I put it away before it could turn into a trick and set my palm near the stone without touching it. I've got 1 sentence, I said soft. Mostly for me. Lon tipped his chin. Not permission. Agreement with air. I spoke it toward the line where dar becomes a kind of light. We won't seal it again. No sermon. No apology strung out for effect. Just the thing said to the space that deserved to hear it first. The draft cooled for 1 breath, like water finds your wrist at a sink, and then warms again to room. In the mist just inside, a height arranged itself the way heights do when they don't owe you proof. Taller than a man, arms long, head a little forward, listening with the face, not advancing, not retreating, attending. The cave's low tone did not rise. It folded itself smaller, as if to make room for our small sentence. Farther off, a footfall counted itself once, then chose not to be counted again. The shape at the threshold receded 1 pace so slow, you could argue it hadn't moved. The wrong glint along what wasn't exactly plates softened until the mist stopped trying to outline it. Lon let out a breath I think he'd been saving since before we were born. Harlan's shoulders came square, not big, just right-sized again. Sully nodded like a man who has decided the math balance is enough to put his pencil down. June didn't reach for her recorder. Enough is data, she had said yesterday. Today the room said it for her. We stood long enough to keep from turning it into theater. Then Lon's fingers made the smallest turn in the air, and we turned with them. No glances back. That looked like bargaining. The edge stayed a place behind us, not a test. Outside the lip, the sky had finally decided what to do with the gray it had been carrying all morning. Rain came on polite, then honest. Not a hard dump, just the good kind that joins leaves to air and makes limestone smell clean. The path dampened into traction. The jungle that likes right angles flattened its geometry into gloss. We took the switchbacks at the pace knees prefer on the second day. Halfway down, the breeze from the mouth gathered itself and walked with us for a few yards. Cool stripe across the nape. Goodbye without language. The rule felt easier to carry in wet air. At the rest rock, Sully took out the Polaroid and did not look at it the way men don't look at the picture that has finally decided to be a picture and not a dare. He slid it back under his tags. I opened the empty case and shut it again with my thumb. And for the first time it felt less like lack and more like room. June laughed once, small, tired laugh that didn't need a reason. My model didn't have a variable for this, she said, water running off the brim of her hat in even lines. Call it mercy, I said. Mercy has poor error bars, she said, and didn't argue when I shrugged. Down in the easier trees, the rain stitched the canopy. Thin needles crossing and crossing until the whole top of the world looked sewn. A dog watched us pass from a dry patch with the expression dogs use when humans finally catch up to a simple point. Children in new hats tried to count raindrops and gave up with good humor. The river raised its voice one notch to be heard over its own edges. At the trailhead, Lon's board took the water and kept its paint. Do not count red cleaner in the wet. Tourists clumped under tin roofs and practiced patience. One asked if the key had closed. It is breathing, Lon said. It prefers rain. The man nodded like he'd understood something larger than phrasing and went to look at a beetle with his kid. We threw our packs into the truck bed. Harlan wiped his palms on his pants like a habit that didn't mind being seen. He looked up valley as if a man can pay his respects without making the ridge do any work. We're done, he said. Not final. Finished for today. Done, Sully agreed. The word sat right in his mouth. June slid her cardboard into a plastic sleeve and snapped it shut. I'm not writing this one, she said. Half to me, half to the part of her that loves to make a thing square. Not as a piece. As a rule, maybe. Rules travel, I said. Let it ride with you. Lon stood with his hat low against the rain and looked at each of us the way a teacher looks at students who have returned a book in better shape than they borrowed it. Your sentence was the right size, he told me. Big words block. Copy, I said, and meant to carry that into places that don't have limestone. We rattled down into the village with the cab windows cracked to let steam be reasonable. The cooking smoke had the good sweet of wet wood. Someone's pot said rice in a voice that made the day sit down. A scooter fishtailed past and corrected itself with a laugh. Back in town, we split our goodbyes into parts to make them easier. June got permits stamped with an ink that would fade and a smile that would not. Harlan found a post office and mailed a plain envelope to himself with no return address and a coin inside for weight, his way of pinning time to a place without nails. Sully bought a new pen from a woman who wrapped it like a promise. I found a metal shop that still had someone who could brace and had him solder the hinge on my empty case so it would click once, clean, and then be quiet. On the flight out, the wing wrote a line on nothing again, and I did not watch it the whole time. I let my eyes shut without waiting for trouble to ask permission. Somewhere over the dark piece of ocean between old and new homes, I felt the little bones in my ear remember a note that was not mine and decide they did not need to keep it like a debt. They could keep it like a song you learned and don't need to sing to remember. At home, the garage smelled like oil and wood, and the civility of tools. I put the empty case on the hook next to the radio and left it unlatched on purpose. I took the tour packet waivers, gear lists, all the paper that thinks it can out-argue a place, and slid it under the bench. I wrote 4 words on a card and taped them to the inside of the cabinet door, where I keep things I don't want to forget. No lights, no walls. Under that, smaller. Do not count. Under that, smallest. Leave the road clear. Rain found my roof that night, with the even patience of someone who has learned your address. I lay in the good dark of a house that trusted me and waited to see if the low chorus would come through metal and wood. It didn't. I slept anyway. Edge is a place. You can live there if you keep your feet under you and your hands open. In the morning, I would make coffee, old men call decent, and grease the mower that insists upon attention. I would carry the rule like a pocket tool, not a flag. If the day offered me a way to not be a wall, I would take it. That's all the sentence asked of me when I said it. That's enough. Rain stitched the valley into itself. Camp tarps ticked like clocks, deciding not to keep exact time. We ate the kind of meal that tastes better outside because the air dosed the work: rice, greens, fish that had not had far to go. June drew a little map in the damp on the table and then wiped it away with the back of her hand. Harlan stacked tin plates with the concentration of a man who once stacked other kinds of metal and is grateful he doesn't anymore. Sully found a dry place for the Polaroid and then didn't take it out. Lon checked the knots at 2 corners of the fly and left the others the dignity of holding. We talked around the rule, not over it. There were no speeches. Stories came out short and unadorned and belonged to the people who told them. A dog drifted in from nowhere, made the precise decision that we were harmless, and lay down where the ground had decided to be warm. The cave wind found us in a thin thread once, a cool stripe across the nape, and moved on without asking for acknowledgement. When the rain let up, we sat with the after sound, the drip that keeps the rhythm after the band goes home. Fireflies traced careful cursive between bamboo stems. The ridge lifted its dark shape one step closer to night. June closed her notebook on an empty page. Not writing is also a kind of record, she said, and nobody argued. Sully, who had made a living being exact, looked relieved to let one thing stay unmeasured. Harlan stared into the wet black beyond the lantern glow and found something there that didn't require a name. Lon turned his hat in his hands and wore the expression of a man whose lesson had been received without being performed. Mac. Closing. When it was late enough to make sense, we walked the lamps down to embers and left them there. I lay on my back in the tent and listened to the fabric speak soft truth. Stension here. Slack there. A promise to hold. The little bones in my ear remembered the low note without needing to play it. That felt like progress. I thought of the boys we had been when we'd first come here, all trigger and bravado and a hunger for mice. I thought of the men we were now, with pockets for rules instead of proof. The empty tape case rested against my ribs like a polite weight. It did not accuse, it did not excuse, it was just room. Morning came without theatrics. We broke camp, the way you leave a borrowed room tidy and grateful. June packed her cardboard with the 3 lines and left the post bare. Sully carried the Polaroid the way you carry a keepsake you don't need to show to believe. Harlan took one last look upslope and then let his shoulders belong to the day in front of him. Lon read his own sign, like a man counts children, before a long ride, and smiled at the math. We did not take souvenirs. We did not leave trash. We left a sentence in the place where it belonged and let the place decide whether to keep it. The path down was the same, and not the way roads change under you once you've agreed to walk softer. Back in town, the world performed its ordinary miracles with a competence I have come to envy. Coffee arrived in cups. A scooter refused to stall. A child counted to 14 in a language I don't speak and looked proud of it. We shook hands like men who will see each other again without needing to promise it. On the plane, the wing wrote its line on nothing, and I let my eyes rest. I dreamed about fixing small engines and leaving side passages clear. At home, the garage smelled like oil and civility. I hung the empty case by the radio, unlatched, the hinge clicking once, clean, and then minding its business. There are facts I can't prove and rules I can keep. When the choice comes, I'll pick the rules. No lights into mouths. No walls. Do not count. Leave the road clear. If the day offers me a way, not to be a wall, I will take it. That's the story I brought back, and I am telling it straight. We didn't solve anything. We didn't win. We were permitted to stand at the edge and choose our size. And when the forest went again, it wasn't empty. It was allowed.